What's up, everybody? If you're enjoying this video, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. Almost 3 out of 4 viewers aren't subscribed, and I'd love to have you join the crew. And while you're at it, smash that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. Okay, so, this is gonna sound totally insane, but I swear on my life it's all true. This isn't some friend of a friend's story. This actually happened to me, and I'm still trying to figure it all out. I'm posting this here because I need to tell someone, but I don't want it getting back to me, hence the throwaway account. So, it all started about 2 months ago. My girlfriend, Sarah, and I were completely burned out on the city. We live in Chicago, and don't get me wrong, I love the buzz, but sometimes you just need some air that doesn't smell like car exhaust and desperation, you know? We figured we'd rent a cabin somewhere, get back to nature, just totally unplug. No work emails, no doom scrolling, no YouTube rabbit holes. Just us, some books, maybe a jigsaw puzzle, and a few bottles of wine. Sounds perfect, right? Yeah, well, that's where I messed up, big time. I've been hearing about this dark web thing for years. You know, the Tor browser, those weird .onion links, the forums where you can supposedly buy, like, anything illegal. Honestly, it never interested me. Seemed like a one-way ticket to jail, if you ask me. But then I stumbled on this Reddit thread, an AMA with a guy who claimed he used to be a dark web admin. People were asking him all the usual questions about drugs and guns and whatever, but then someone asked if there was anything normal on the dark web. And the guy said yeah. He said people sell weird antiques, rare books, even rental properties, cabins and cottages so remote, they're not even on Google Maps. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why not just use Airbnb like a normal person? And you're right, I should have. But something about renting a place that was off the grid, like really off the grid, just sounded cool. Plus, everything on Airbnb was either booked or crazy expensive. I figured, if I could find some quirky little place for cheap, why not? So, I downloaded the Tor browser. It's way easier than you'd think, by the way. You just download it, open it, and boom, you're in this whole other internet. I used DuckDuckGo to search for vacation rentals, and after clicking through a bunch of dead links and sketchy forums, I finally found this site. It didn't have a real name, just a random string of letters and numbers followed by .onion. But, surprisingly, it looked legit. Clean design, categories like beach houses, mountain cabins, desert retreats. I clicked on cabins and started scrolling. Most of the listings were super vague, just a picture of a cabin, sometimes obviously ripped from Google Images, and a description like secluded location, great for nature lovers. But then, one caught my eye. The photo was grainy and kind of crooked, but it looked real. A small, wooden cabin surrounded by trees, with a porch swing and a fire pit out front. The description read, rustic cabin deep in the woods. No neighbors for miles. Perfect for couples or solo retreats. $200 for 3 nights. It even had a contact email, something like cabinretreat7@reacted.onion. I showed it to Sarah. She was skeptical, obviously. Isn't the dark web, like, super illegal? She asked. Only if you're buying, like, weapons or something, I said. This is just a rental. She rolled her eyes but eventually agreed. Fine, she said, but if we get murdered, it's on you. I emailed the address, and within an hour, I got a reply. The person on the other end didn't ask any weird questions, just my name, which I faked, obviously, the dates we wanted, and confirmation of the $200 payment in Bitcoin. Luckily, I already had a Coinbase account from when I was briefly obsessed with crypto. So, I transferred the money, and they sent me back the address and a code to unlock the front door. The address was in some tiny town in Michigan I'd never heard of, like Pine Ridge or Cedar Creek, I can't remember. Google Maps couldn't pinpoint the exact location, but it got me close. The directions said to follow a dirt road off the main highway for about 6 miles until I saw a mailbox painted bright red. The cabin would be down a smaller path on the right. Sarah and I packed up the car, just the essentials, clothes, snacks, her Kindle, my laptop, in case we got bored, and a couple of board games. We even stopped at a McDonald's drive-thru for some road trip fuel. The drive took about 6 hours, but it was actually kind of fun. We blasted 90s throwback playlists and made stupid bets about what kind of weird stuff we'd find at this cabin. When we finally got to the dirt road, it was exactly as described, long, winding, and totally desolate. No houses, no gas stations, nothing. Just trees on both sides, their branches forming a kind of tunnel overhead. We passed the red mailbox around sunset, and I turned onto the smaller path. It was even rougher than the dirt road, and my car, a beat-up Honda Civic, was not happy about it. By the time we pulled up to the cabin, it was almost dark. The cabin looked just like the picture, small, rustic, and kind of charming in a rundown way. There was a porch swing, just like in the photo, and a pile of firewood stacked against the side. I parked the car, grabbed our bags, and Sarah punched in the code for the door. "Wow, this is cozy," she said as we stepped inside. The interior was simple. A small living room with a worn-out couch and a wood-burning stove, a tiny kitchen with mismatched cabinets, and a single bedroom with a queen-sized bed. The only light came from these old-fashioned kerosene lamps, which gave the place a warm, flickering glow. It wasn't exactly the Ritz, but it had its charm. We spent the first night settling in, making a small fire in the stove, and playing a couple of rounds of Uno. It was nice, honestly. Quiet, peaceful, exactly what we needed. But then, around midnight, things started to get weird. I was in the kitchen, washing out my coffee mug, when I noticed something strange about the floorboards. One of them, near the far corner, looked different, like it had been pried up and put back down. "Hey, Sarah, come look at this," I said, pointing it out to her. "Maybe it's just warped from the moisture," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. I bent down and tried to lift the board, but it wouldn't budge. It was nailed down tight. Still, something about it stuck in my brain. It felt off. Sarah shrugged it off and went to bed, but I couldn't stop staring at that spot. Eventually, I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and started prying at the edges. It took a while, but the board finally came loose. And underneath was a dark hole. A ladder led down into what looked like a basement. "Ah, Sarah?" I called out. She came back into the room, looking half asleep. "What is it?" she asked. I pointed to the hole. "There's a basement." She groaned. "Cool. Don't go down there, or you're sleeping on the porch." I laughed it off, but after she went back to bed, I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what was down there. So, I grabbed one of the kerosene lamps, lowered myself onto the ladder, and climbed down. That's when I saw her. Sitting in a wheelchair, in the middle of the basement, was an old woman. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her hair was a tangled mess of white. She was just sitting there, staring at me with these cloudy blue eyes. And when she finally spoke, her voice was low and raspy, like it hadn't been used in years. "You are here. After so long," she said. "Now I can finally finish the ritual." And that's where I'll leave this part for now. I know, I'm the idiot who climbed into the creepy basement. But trust me, what happened next was way worse than you think. I'll write up the rest soon. Let me know if anyone's interested. So, there I was, standing in this damp, musty basement, holding a flickering kerosene lamp, staring at this old woman in a wheelchair who just dropped that bomb on me. Finish the ritual? What ritual? My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. The old woman was just sitting there, in the center of the room, her frail hands resting on her lap, her back hunched. The air down there was heavy, thick with that stale smell you only get in places that haven't been touched in decades. And then she spoke again, her voice still raspy but maybe a little steadier this time. "You are here. After so long," she repeated. "Now I can finally finish the ritual." I froze. It felt like my brain just short-circuited. I mean, I couldn't even begin to process what she was saying because I was still stuck on the fact that she looked like my grandma. And not just vaguely, she looked exactly like her. Same frail frame, same sharp cheekbones, same pale blue eyes. The thing is, my grandma, Eleanor, passed away 4 years ago. Or at least, that's what I'd been told. I backed up instinctively, gripping the edge of the ladder behind me. What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Who are you?" She tilted her head slightly, like she was studying me. "You don't recognize me?" she asked, almost with a hint of amusement. Then she smiled. And that's when my stomach dropped. Because it wasn't just any smile, it was her smile. My grandma's smile. The one I'd seen 1,000 times growing up. But how could she be here? I'd been to her funeral. I'd seen the casket. I remember sitting in the front row with my mom, watching as they lowered her into the ground. It didn't make any sense. I don't understand," I stammered. "This can't be real. You're not real." She laughed softly at that, a dry, wheezing sound that echoed off the stone walls. "You've grown up so much, Alex," she said. I was too stunned to correct her about my name. I wasn't sure you'd come back. But now that you're here, we can finally do what we were meant to do. I glanced around the basement, trying to get my bearings. The walls were made of old stone, and there was hardly any furniture, just a few dusty crates and a wooden table pushed against one wall. But what really caught my eye was the floor. It wasn't concrete or dirt like you'd expect. It was stone, but not like the walls. The floor was made of these large, flat slabs, and etched into them were these strange symbols. Circles, triangles, lines. None of it made sense to me, but it definitely didn't look like something you'd find in a regular basement. "What do you mean, meant to do?" I asked, my voice shaking. She leaned forward slightly in her wheelchair, her pale eyes locking onto mine. The ritual, she said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. The one your family started long before you were born. The one I've been waiting to finish. I don't know why, but the way she said your family hit me like a ton of bricks. I started thinking about my mom, my uncles, all the weird little stories I'd heard growing up about our family history. My grandma used to tell me these old legends when I was a kid, about curses and secret traditions and ancestors who made deals they couldn't break. I always thought they were just stories, but now... Look, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I don't know what you think is happening here, but I'm leaving. I'm going back upstairs, and I'm calling the police, or someone. She shook her head slowly. You can leave, she said, but you won't get far. This place doesn't work the way you think it does. I didn't wait to find out what she meant. I scrambled back up the ladder, nearly dropping the lamp in the process, and slammed the floorboard back into place. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the nails, trying to wedge them back in to seal the opening. By the time I was done, Sarah was standing in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. What the hell are you doing, Mike? She asked groggily. There's someone down there, I blurted out, in the basement. Her expression shifted instantly. What are you talking about? Who? I don't know, I said, my words tumbling out too fast. There's this old woman, and she's saying all this weird stuff about rituals, and... Sarah cut me off with a raised hand. Okay, stop, just stop. You're not making any sense. Are you sure you didn't just fall asleep and imagine it? Maybe you're sleepwalking or something. No, I said, louder than I meant to. I'm serious, Sarah. She's down there. Sarah sighed, clearly not buying it, but she humored me enough to grab a flashlight and check the basement herself. When she lifted the floorboard and shone the light down, there was nothing. No wheelchair, no symbols on the floor, just an empty, damp basement. I could tell by the look on her face that she thought I was losing it. See, she said. There's no one here. You probably just freaked yourself out because this place is old and creepy. But she was there, I insisted. I saw her. Sarah sighed again and put the floorboard back in place. It's late. Let's just go to bed and deal with this in the morning, okay? I didn't have the energy to argue, so I followed her back to the bedroom. But I didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Was it a hallucination? Some kind of elaborate prank? Or was it something worse? The only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just stepped into something way bigger than I could understand. And that maybe, just maybe, renting this cabin was the biggest mistake of my life. The next morning, Sarah wasn't shy about letting me know how ridiculous she thought I sounded. You seriously think there's a ghost grandma living in the basement? She asked over a cup of instant coffee. Do you even hear yourself, Mike? It's not just that, I said, trying to explain without sounding totally insane. She looked exactly like my grandma, Eleanor. I'm not saying it's a ghost, but there's something going on here, Sarah. Something I can't explain. Sarah rolled her eyes. All right, so let's say it is her, your grandma who's supposed to be dead. Why is she hanging out in some random cabin in Michigan? I don't know. I shot back, frustration bubbling up. But she knew things about our family. She said there was some kind of ritual. That got her attention. Sarah put down her coffee and frowned. What kind of ritual? I don't know, I admitted. She didn't explain. But there were these symbols on the floor in the basement, like carvings or something. They looked old. Sarah leaned back in her chair, considering this. Okay, so maybe someone set this up to mess with you, she said. Like, what if this cabin owner somehow knows your family history? They could have hired an actress or something to freak you out. On the dark web? I asked, raising an eyebrow. You think someone went through all this effort just to pull a prank on two random people who rented their cabin? That doesn't make any sense. Sarah sighed and rubbed her temples. Fine. So what do you want to do? Pack up and leave? Or do you actually want to figure out what's going on? That was the thing. I didn't know. Every rational part of me was screaming to leave, to get back in the car, drive 6 hours home, and never think about this cabin again. But there was another part of me, a stubborn, stupid part, that felt like I couldn't leave without getting some answers. If this really was connected to my family, I needed to know. We'll stay, I said finally. One more day. But I'm going to do some digging. Sarah shook her head but didn't argue. Fine. But if this turns into some Blair Witch situation, I'm blaming you. The first thing I did was call my mom. I didn't want to tell her everything, especially not over the phone, but I figured she might know something about the cabin or the symbols I saw. Hey, Mom, I said when she picked up. Quick question for you. Did Grandma Eleanor ever mention anything about a cabin in Michigan? She hesitated. Michigan? No, not that I remember. Why? I could hear the familiar clinking of her bracelets as she moved around on the other end of the line, probably washing dishes. Just. Sarah and I rented this cabin, and it's kind of weird. It got me thinking about those stories Grandma used to tell, you know, about the family traditions and all that. My mom laughed softly. Oh, those. She was always into that folklore stuff. Most of it was nonsense, you know that. Yeah, but... I paused, not sure how much to say. Did she ever talk about, like, rituals? That made her laugh again, but it was more nervous this time. Well, sure, she had all kinds of superstitions. She used to say our family had some kind of, I don't know, connection to the old ways, whatever that means. She said her grandmother, your great-great-grandmother, was part of some group that practiced the old traditions. But I always assumed she was just telling stories. Did she ever say what the traditions were? I pressed. No, my mom said, just fake stuff about nature and balance and, I don't know, rituals to keep things in order. Honestly, I never paid much attention. Why are you asking about this anyway, Mike? I hesitated again. No reason. Just curious. We hung up a few minutes later, but I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. The old ways. Traditions to keep things in order. It sounded crazy, but what if there was some truth to it? What if my family really had been part of something bigger, a tradition or a belief system that had been passed down for generations? And what if this cabin was somehow connected to it? Sarah and I spent the rest of the morning exploring the property. The cabin itself was small, but the surrounding woods seemed endless. We found an overgrown path that led to a clearing with a crumbling stone circle in the middle. It looked like it could have been some kind of fire pit, but it was weirdly elaborate, like something you'd see in a historical site. "This place gets weirder by the minute," Sarah muttered, kicking at one of the stones. "I swear, if a cult shows up, I'm out of here." I laughed nervously, but her words hit a little too close to home. The symbols in the basement, the stone circle, the stories my grandma used to tell, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle, but I didn't have enough to see the full picture. That night, after we ate dinner, cold sandwiches and chips, hardly gourmet, I decided to take another look at the basement. Sarah refused to come with me, so I grabbed the flashlight and went down alone. The space looked just as empty as before. No wheelchair, no old woman, no carvings on the floor. But I noticed something I hadn't seen the night before, a small wooden box, tucked into the corner under a pile of dusty rags. It was about the size of a shoebox, and when I picked it up, it felt heavier than I expected. I brought it upstairs and set it on the kitchen table. Sarah watched me from across the room, clearly unimpressed. "What is that?" she asked. "Some kind of treasure chest?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But it feels important." The box was locked, but the wood was old and brittle. With a little effort, I managed to pry it open. Inside was a bundle of papers, yellowed with age, and a small brass key. The papers were handwritten, covered in neat, looping cursive that reminded me of my grandma's handwriting. Most of it was hard to read. It looked like a journal or a collection of notes. But one word jumped out at me immediately: ritual. "What does it say?" Sarah asked, leaning over my shoulder. I scanned the first page, my heart pounding. "It's instructions," I said slowly, "for some kind of ritual." Sarah groaned. "Oh, come on. This is ridiculous." "No, listen," I said, pointing to one of the lines. "It says something about calling forth the old blood and restoring balance. And look, there's a drawing of those symbols I saw in the basement." Sarah didn't look convinced, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was important. The more I read, the more I realized this wasn't just some random journal. It was a record of my family's history, our connection to this place, and to whatever tradition my grandma had been talking about. That's when I found the last page. It was short, just a single line written in bold, jagged letters. "It must be finished." I stared at the journal in front of me, my mind racing as I read and reread that final line: "It must be finished." What has to be finished? I muttered, flipping back through the pages for clues. Sarah was pacing behind me, clearly torn between irritation and concern. "Do you seriously think this is real?" she asked. "Like, really real?" "Because it sounds like something out of one of those bad Netflix horror movies." I didn't respond right away. The thing was, I didn't want to believe it either. But the journal, the symbols in the basement, the old woman who looked exactly like my grandma, none of it was normal. And the more I pieced together from the journal, the more it felt like this wasn't just some coincidence. The journal wasn't long, maybe 10 or 15 pages, but it was dense with cryptic notes and diagrams. From what I could understand, it was written by someone in my family, maybe even my grandma Eleanor herself, and it explained everything. It turned out the ritual wasn't just some harmless tradition. It was a deal. A deal my grandma had made decades ago with someone that the journal only referred to as the Watcher. I know, it sounds ridiculous, but the way it was described, it didn't feel like some made-up story. According to the journal, the deal was supposed to protect the family, bring prosperity to future generations. The price. A soul. Specifically, a soul from someone in the family. I felt a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck as I read that part. A soul? What did that even mean? Did she actually give someone's soul away? And to who or what? Sarah stopped pacing and leaned over the table, pointing to the page I was reading. Wait, hold on, she said. Are you saying your grandma sold someone's soul? Like, to a demon or something? I don't know, I admitted. It doesn't use the word demon. It just calls it the Watcher. But yeah, that's what it sounds like. Sarah let out a sharp laugh, but it was more nervous than anything. Okay, that's insane. Your grandma wasn't some dark wizard or whatever. She was a sweet old lady who baked cookies and told you bedtime stories. That's what I thought, too, I said, flipping through the journal again. But look at this. I pointed to a section near the middle where the writing got messy, almost frantic. It described how the deal was supposed to work. The family would reap the benefits of the Watcher's favor, good fortune, protection from harm, all that, but only if they held up their end of the bargain. The ritual had to be performed every so often, every few decades from what I could tell. And if it wasn't completed, the deal would collapse. And here's the kicker. The journal made it clear that the soul required for the ritual had to come from someone who was willing. Willing? Sarah said, reading over my shoulder. What does that even mean? Who in their right mind would agree to something like that? I shook my head, still trying to process it. I don't know. Maybe they didn't know what they were agreeing to. Or maybe they were tricked, Sarah suggested. Like, what if your grandma didn't tell them the whole truth? That thought hit me like a punch to the gut. My grandma had always been this loving, kind person in my eyes. But if this journal was real, if she'd really made a deal with something as horrifying as the Watcher, then how much of her life had been a lie? How much of our lives had been shaped by this deal without us even knowing? We spent the rest of the day poring over the journal, trying to piece together the timeline. From what we could tell, my grandma had made the deal sometime in the 1940s or 50s, when she was still young. She must have performed the ritual at least once, probably when my mom was a child. But then, something happened. Either she stopped, or she wasn't able to finish it the last time. That's why she was still here. Or, more specifically, why something that looked like her was still here. Okay, Sarah said, setting the journal down with a frustrated sigh. Let's say all of this is true. What happens if the ritual doesn't get finished? Does it even say? I flipped to the final page again, where the writing got even more chaotic. There was a lot of stuff about unleashing chaos and breaking the balance, but most of it didn't make sense. Then I found a line that stopped me cold. Without completion, the Watcher will take back its gifts and claim what is owed. I read it out loud, and Sarah's face went pale. Claim what is owed, she repeated. That sounds bad. Yeah, I said quietly. It does. That night, I couldn't sleep. Sarah had already crashed on the couch, exhausted from all the back and forth over whether we should stay or leave. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the journal and the brass key that had been tucked inside. The key didn't seem to fit anything in the cabin, and I couldn't figure out what it was for, but something about it felt important, like it was a piece of the puzzle I hadn't figured out yet. Around midnight, I heard it again. That voice. "You're almost ready," it said, low and raspy, coming from somewhere near the floor. I looked down and saw the same loose floorboard, the one leading to the basement. The voice continued, calm but insistent. "The Watcher is waiting." I didn't respond. I just sat there, frozen, listening as the voice faded into silence. The journal's final words echoed in my mind. It must be finished. The next morning, I made a decision. I told Sarah we were leaving. "Finally," she said, relieved. "This place is bad vibe central. Let's get out of here before something even weirder happens." We packed up the car and got ready to head out. But before we left, I grabbed the journal and the key. I don't know why, I just felt like I couldn't leave them behind. Something about this whole situation felt unfinished, like I'd barely scratched the surface of whatever my grandma had been involved in. As we pulled out of the driveway and back onto the dirt road, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw my grandma, or whatever she'd become, standing on the porch, watching us leave. But when I blinked, she was gone. The drive back to Chicago was quiet. Too quiet. Sarah spent most of the ride scrolling through her phone, pretending to be distracted by Instagram or texting her sister, but I could tell she was just as shaken as I was. I kept both hands on the wheel, eyes on the road, trying not to think about the cabin, or my grandma, or that voice I'd heard for the second time last night. But the journal was still sitting on the passenger seat, next to Sarah's bag, and I couldn't stop glancing at it. We made it back to our apartment in the city by late afternoon. It was surreal, stepping back into the world of honking cars, crowded sidewalks, and the comforting hum of modern life. It felt like we'd been gone for weeks, not just 2 days. But even as I unlocked our front door and set down my bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us back. For the next few days, I threw myself into researching everything I could about the Watcher. I didn't want to believe it was real, but the more I dug, the more I found threads that lined up with the journal. Folklore forums, obscure occult blogs, even old academic papers, there were scattered references to a being called the Watcher across multiple cultures and time periods. In every version of the story, the Watcher was described as some kind of ancient entity, neither good nor evil, but bound by its own rules. It would grant favors in exchange for sacrifices, but the deals always came with strings attached. Sarah wasn't thrilled about me obsessing over it. "You're just going to drive yourself crazy," she said one night as I sat hunched over my laptop. "Whatever happened at that cabin, we're done with it. We're safe now." "Are we, though?" I asked, glancing over at the journal, which I'd left open on the coffee table. If this is real, if my family really made some kind of deal with this thing, who's to say it's done with us? Sarah didn't have an answer for that. She just grabbed her blanket and went to bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The breakthrough came a few days later when I finally figured out what the brass key was for. I'd been going through my grandma's old things, which my mom had boxed up after she passed. Most of it was just sentimental stuff, photo albums, recipes, little trinkets she collected over the years. But then I found an old wooden chest, tucked away in the back of a closet. It was locked, and the keyhole was small and rusted. But when I tried the brass key, it fit perfectly. Inside the chest, I found more journals, dozens of them, all filled with the same looping cursive handwriting. Some of the entries dated back to the 1940s, and they told a much darker story about my grandma's life than I'd ever known. She had made the deal with the Watcher when she was just 18 years old. The entries didn't say exactly why, but it sounded like she'd been desperate, maybe for money, maybe for protection. Whatever the reason, the deal had worked, at least at first. Her life improved, her family prospered, and everything seemed fine. But then the time came for her to hold up her end of the bargain. She tried to complete the ritual once, in the 1970s, but something had gone wrong. The journal entries from that time were frantic, almost incoherent. She kept writing about how the balance had been disrupted, how she'd failed to finish the ritual, and how the Watcher was waiting for her to fix it. Then, in the final entry, dated just a few weeks before her death, she wrote this: "I've run out of time. I can feel it watching me, waiting. But I can't bring myself to do what must be done. I've cursed this family. I only hope someone will have the courage to finish what I could not. I didn't tell Sarah what I found. She was already stressed enough, and I didn't want to drag her any further into this mess. But the weight of what I'd uncovered was impossible to ignore. My grandma had made a deal with something beyond comprehension, and now it was my problem to deal with. I thought about going back to the cabin, about trying to finish the ritual myself. But the journal had been maddeningly vague about what the ritual actually required. The one thing it made clear was that the ritual needed a willing soul. And that thought terrified me more than anything else. How could anyone willingly give up their soul? What kind of person would agree to something like that? And then it hit me. The soul didn't have to be someone else's. It could be mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. The thought kept circling in my mind. If my grandma had made this deal to protect our family, didn't I have a responsibility to fix it? Wasn't it my duty to finish what she couldn't? But then another thought crept in, just as unsettling. What if I refused? What if I ignored the Watcher, ignored the ritual, and just lived my life? Would it come for me? For Sarah? For my future children? By sunrise, I'd made my decision. I haven't gone back to the cabin yet. Honestly, I don't know if I ever will. Part of me thinks I should just burn the journal, toss the key, and pretend none of this ever happened. But another part of me knows that's not how this works. The Watcher doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. So, for now, I'm stuck in this limbo, waiting for the courage or the desperation to make my next move. And if I do decide to go back, to finish what my grandma started, well, let's just hope I'm the only one who has to pay the price. Because one thing's for sure, the Watcher is waiting. And it always gets what it's owed. You wouldn't think a background in cybersecurity would land you in anything remotely like a task force. When you're knee-deep in code, staring at endless lines of IP addresses and encrypted packets, the job feels more like being a basement dweller than a crime fighter. But about 6 months ago, I got approached by someone from a government agency I can't name, think 3 letters, and no, It wasn't the FBI. They needed a civilian tech consultant for a special project targeting dark web activities. The mission was simple, at least on paper: identify and shut down illegal operations. Human trafficking rings, illicit markets, and other truly disgusting stuff that made your stomach churn were rampant in the dark web's hidden corners. But there was one catch: this wasn't just any dark web operation. They were after something weirder. The offer came with a decent paycheck, an NDA so strict I could have been jailed for blinking wrong, and access to tools I'd never seen before. Naturally, I said yes. Who wouldn't? The task force operated out of a gray, nondescript building in the middle of a business park that might as well have been invisible. No signs, no logos. The windows were mirrored, reflecting nothing but the dull parking lot. Inside, it was all cold lighting and humming servers. My team consisted of a couple of agents, a handful of IT guys like me, and one dude named Rex who didn't even try to make you feel better. For the first few months, everything was routine. We were assigned specific sites, given .onion links to investigate, and tasked with finding vulnerabilities in the host networks. The usual suspects came up: drug marketplaces, forums for illegal firearms, and the occasional scam pretending to sell stolen Netflix accounts. We were good at our job. Sites went down almost as fast as we found them. Then we came across the Crimson Grove. The name stood out immediately. Compared to the more straightforward names we encountered: Buy Drugs Now or Bitcoin Billionaire, this one seemed out of place. The link was buried in a forum that discussed dark web myths, cryptids, government conspiracies, that kind of stuff. Most of it was garbage, but the Crimson Grove was mentioned repeatedly. Users described it as an exclusive forum for rites and rituals. That alone made it worth investigating. Using a Tor browser, we accessed the link. The landing page was bizarre. Unlike the crude designs of most dark websites, this one was polished. The background was a looping video of a dark forest at night, with the sound of faint whispers playing if you unmuted it. The menu was sparse, just 3 tabs: Community, Gallery, and Offerings. Before we could proceed, we had to make an account. That was unusual. Most sites we visited didn't require registration, especially for casual browsing. But it was also a red flag. I started creating a fake account, using an encrypted email address and a randomly generated username. But every time I filled in a field, the system auto-corrected it, forcing me to input what looked like gibberish symbols. When I finally got in, I realized the username wasn't random at all. It was the exact string of characters associated with my work ID. I chalked it up to paranoia. Maybe the system sniffed out our IP address and generated something unique. But Rex didn't like it. "We're being logged," he muttered, pulling out a flash drive. "Capture everything. If they're tracking us, we need a footprint of their tracking." The community tab was a forum, but its threads were cryptic. Titles like "The 13th Passage" and "Offer Accepted, Awaiting Release" dominated the front page. Some were vague requests for guidance, while others seemed to reference rituals with precise dates and times. One thread caught my attention: Names of the Fallen. It was pinned at the top, and every comment in the thread was a name followed by a date. Rex leaned over my screen. "What's this?" I scrolled through the names. They were posted daily, sometimes in bursts of 3 or 4 at once. Some included what I assumed were cities, countries, even coordinates. The most recent entry read, J. Wallace, January 8th, 2025, Chicago, Illinois. None of US knew who J. Wallace was, but it was clear something was being tracked here. Cross-check that name, Rex barked at one of the agents. The gallery tab was worse. It hosted a collection of videos, each one titled with a person's name and the word right. We clicked on the most recent one. It was low quality and grainy, showing what looked like a dimly lit room. A person sat in a chair, their face obscured by shadow. A voice off-screen spoke in a language none of us recognized, followed by the sound of something sharp being dragged across a surface. The video ended abruptly. Rex immediately told us to stop clicking through the site. We'd seen enough. He was going to escalate this up the chain and shut the whole thing down. But before we closed it, I glanced at the offerings tab. It required a login separate from the one we'd already created. I didn't push it. As we packed up for the day, one of the junior agents, a guy named Alex, pointed out something strange. Our internal server, which was air-gapped from the internet, had pinged twice during our session. Rex swore under his breath and ordered everyone to run diagnostics. The flash drives we'd used were wiped before anyone could even look at them. But here's the thing, the name J. Wallace popped up in a news article the next morning. They were a missing person, last seen in Chicago, Illinois. The date matched. None of us talked about it openly, but I could tell we were all thinking the same thing. This wasn't just another dark website. Something else was going on. We just didn't know how bad it was going to get. The next day at the office, there was this tension in the air, the kind that hangs around when people are too nervous to ask questions out loud. Rex wasn't saying much, and the higher-ups had already started poking their noses into our report on the Crimson Grove. For a while, we assumed the case was going to be escalated out of our hands, and honestly, we were fine with that. But then something strange happened. Nothing. Days went by, and we heard no updates, no orders to investigate further, no instructions to pull the plug, just silence. That was unusual. Typically, when we flagged a site as significant, it was either handed off to another team or shut down completely within hours. The Crimson Grove just sat there, untouched. Out of curiosity, I tried accessing it again from home. I wasn't doing anything official, just checking if the site was even still up. To my surprise, it was. The same eerie forest background, the same looping whispers. It almost felt like the site wanted to be found. The community tab now had a new pinned post, "Welcome, observers." It was timestamped just hours after we first accessed the site. The post contained nothing but a single image, a grainy photo of a dark conference room lit only by a projector displaying a bright white screen. It was our office. I stared at the photo for a good minute, trying to process what I was looking at. The angle wasn't one we'd ever see on our internal security cameras. It was taken from inside the room as if someone had been standing there. But that was impossible. The building was locked down tighter than a vault, with restricted access points and biometric scans at every door. I closed the site immediately. The next day, I debated bringing it up with Rex, but something about his mood kept me quiet. He seemed stressed, more than usual. I overheard him on the phone with someone, using phrases like protocol breach and containment issue. When I finally got a chance to talk to him, he waved me off and said, "Focus on your assigned tasks." Let the big stuff get handled upstairs. Except the big stuff wasn't going away. A week after our initial investigation, one of our junior agents, Melissa, didn't show up for work. She wasn't the type to miss a shift without calling, so Rex tried to reach her. No answer. Later that morning, HR confirmed she'd officially resigned via email. That raised a few eyebrows. Melissa had just been promoted a month ago. Quitting out of the blue didn't make sense. When I checked the names of the fallen thread on the Crimson Grove that afternoon, Melissa's name was there. M. Hayes, January 12, 2025, Seattle, Washington. I didn't tell anyone. What was I supposed to say? Hey, I was casually browsing the creepy site we're supposed to be shutting down, and our missing coworker's name is on their list. That wasn't going to fly. Still, I started keeping track. Over the next few days, more names appeared. Some were familiar people from other teams in our building. Others were complete strangers. The dates and locations were always specific, but they didn't follow a pattern I could figure out. By now, the Crimson Grove had become an unspoken topic in the office. No one directly mentioned it, but you could tell everyone was thinking about it. A few people even requested transfers to other assignments, citing vague reasons like family obligations or personal matters. It wasn't hard to guess what was really going on. Things took a weirder turn when one of our systems analysts, a guy named Dan, tried running a trace on the site's hosting server. He was one of those guys who thrived on technical puzzles, and he didn't believe in unsolvable mysteries. I think that's why Rex gave him the green light, to keep him busy and maybe get some answers. Dan's preliminary report was strange. The site's IP address bounced through dozens of countries, from Romania to Japan to rural Alaska, making it virtually impossible to pinpoint its origin. That wasn't too surprising for a dark website, but then Dan noticed something else. Every time he tried pinging the server, his own name would appear briefly in the Community tab under a new thread titled Incoming Queries. The threads disappeared seconds later, but he swore they were there. It's like the site's aware of me, he told me, only half joking. He decided to escalate things by running a deep packet inspection. That's when things got really unusual. The moment he started the process, our internal network went down completely. Every monitor in the office turned black, and the lights flickered for a few seconds. When the system came back online, Dan's workstation was locked, and his account had been disabled remotely. Rex was furious. He ordered Dan to pack up and leave for the day, claiming the network failure was just a precautionary measure. But Dan didn't come back the next morning. Like Melissa, he'd officially resigned, this time via a hastily written letter dropped off at the front desk. I checked the site again that night. Dan's name was there, D. Michaels, January 15, 2025, Austin, Texas. It felt like a pattern was forming, but I couldn't figure out the rules. Why some people and not others? Why the specific dates and places? And most importantly, what happened to the people whose names appeared? Rex called an emergency meeting the next day. He told us the investigation into the Crimson Grove was being handed off to another agency. Our team was instructed to stand down immediately, no questions asked. He didn't give a reason, but his tone left no room for argument. The problem was, I couldn't just stand down. Not after everything I'd seen. And I wasn't the only one. After the meeting, The mood in the office shifted from uneasy to outright hostile. It was like everyone was trying to figure out who would be next to resign. Nobody said it out loud, but we all knew what was happening. The Crimson Grove wasn't just some creepy corner of the internet, it was targeting us. Rex doubled down on his orders to stop investigating. Any mention of the site in our system logs was scrubbed, and he even had the network team block access to Tor browsers on our devices. But you can't just put the genie back in the bottle. The damage was already done. A few days later, I got a message from one of the remaining team members, a guy named Ethan. He was one of the quieter agents, good at his job but not the type to draw attention to himself. His message was short and cryptic, need to talk. Starbucks on 5th, 7 p.m. Don't bring your work phone. I wasn't sure if I should even go, but curiosity got the better of me. When I arrived at the Starbucks, Ethan was already there, sitting in the corner with a laptop that definitely wasn't issued by the agency. "I'm being careful," he said before I could even sit down. "No network tracking, no GPS. This isn't going through their system." "What's this about?" I asked. He turned the laptop around to face me. On the screen was a local archive of the Crimson Grove's community tab. "You downloaded this?" I kept my voice low, but the disbelief was clear. "Not exactly. I mirrored it. Look, I know we're not supposed to mess with it, but I couldn't let this go. The site's running some kind of automated process, and it's monitoring us in real time. I've been tracking it, and it's reacting to what we do." He clicked on a folder labeled Patterns. Inside were screenshots of posts that had appeared and disappeared within seconds, threads referencing specific times, usernames, even IP addresses. Ethan had somehow caught them before they vanished. "Check this out," he said, opening his screenshot. It was a thread titled "The Observer Deadline." The post listed a series of dates, starting with the day we'd first accessed the site. Each date matched one of our teammates' supposed resignation announcements. The list continued into the future, with 3 more dates highlighted. One of them was tomorrow. "Who's next?" I asked, already dreading the answer. Ethan hesitated, then pulled up a text file. "I don't know for sure, but I think it's Carter." Carter was one of the agency's IT guys, a contractor like me. He wasn't even on the team that had investigated the Crimson Grove, but Ethan explained that the site didn't seem to care about direct involvement. If you were even tangentially connected, you were fair game. "You've got to show this to Rex," I said. Ethan shook his head. "My Smith knows." "Why do you think he's shutting us down?" "He's trying to protect himself." That thought hadn't occurred to me, but it made sense. Rex had always seemed more concerned with covering his tracks than figuring out what was actually going on. As we sat there, Ethan's laptop started flashing a notification. New post detected, the Crimson Grove. He clicked it without hesitation, and a new thread popped up. It was titled "Participants Required." The post contained a single line of text, read, January 19th, 2025, San Francisco, California. Ethan's face went pale. Is this live?" I asked. He nodded, closing the laptop quickly. "I think we're done here." I didn't hear from Ethan after that. He didn't show up to work the next day, and nobody could get in touch with him. His name appeared on the Names of the Fallen thread that same afternoon. E. Palmer, January 19, 2025, San Francisco, California. At this point, I stopped pretending this wasn't personal. The Crimson Grove had escalated beyond anything I'd seen before. If Ethan was right, and the site was monitoring us in real time, then simply being part of the investigation was enough to put you on its radar. But what bothered me most was the question nobody seemed to be asking. Why? Why did this site exist in the first place? Who was running it, and what happened to the people on its list? I decided to do some digging of my own. If the agency wasn't going to stop this, maybe I could at least figure out what we were up against. Using a laptop that wasn't tied to the agency, I accessed the Crimson Grove from a public Wi-Fi network. This time, I didn't browse the tabs or look at the forums. I went straight to the Contact Us section. It was a simple form, asking for a name and message. I typed out a single question: "What do you want from us?" I hit submit, half expecting nothing to happen. Instead, a loading icon appeared, followed by a new page. You already know the answer. Beneath the text was a list of names, my coworkers, myself, and even Rex. Next to each name was a single word: witness. The page refreshed automatically, and the list was gone. I closed the browser, shut the laptop, and walked out of the cafe, trying to process what I'd just seen. Whatever the Crimson Grove was, it didn't just know about us, it needed us for something. But I still didn't know what. After seeing the word witness next to my name on the Crimson Grove, I couldn't ignore the implications anymore. It wasn't just a site tracking us, it was using us. But for what, and why? I didn't know where to begin, but I couldn't let it drop, even if that meant breaking Rex's stand-down order. That night, I went over everything I had: screenshots, logs, anything I'd quietly backed up before Rex ordered the wipe. I wasn't looking for answers anymore, I was looking for patterns. If Ethan had been right about the dates and names lining up, then there had to be more. The first thing I noticed was the timestamps. Every name that appeared on the Names of the Fallen thread coincided with a specific time of day, almost down to the second. I cross-referenced this with the dates and realized they matched up to news reports of disappearances, not just our coworkers, but random people who'd been listed on the site before we'd even accessed it. What stood out was the precision. It was as if the site knew exactly when and where these people would disappear. How was that possible? The second thing I noticed was a strange consistency in the locations. Most were major cities, but not always. A few coordinates pointed to places in the middle of nowhere: forests, abandoned industrial sites, even the middle of the ocean. I wasn't sure if the locations were symbolic or literal, but the randomness made it harder to pin down a motive. I shared my findings with one of the only remaining team members I trusted, a data analyst named Sarah. She wasn't directly involved in the original investigation, but she had a reputation for being level-headed and meticulous. "This feels deliberate," she said after reviewing the data. "Like someone, or something, is choosing these people for a reason." "But what's the criteria?" "That's what I can't figure out," I admitted. "It's not just people who access the site. Look at the older names. Some of these people probably never even touched the dark web." Sarah leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen. "What about the offerings tab? Did anyone get in?" "No," I said. "It required a separate login, and after Ethan, well, I didn't push it. Sarah frowned. Maybe that's where the answer is. If they're offering something, it might explain why certain people are chosen. We both knew we couldn't access the tab directly, not without drawing attention. But Sarah had an idea. Using a reverse engineering tool, she began combing through the site's source code. It was risky, and if the site was truly monitoring us, it wouldn't go unnoticed. Still, Sarah was confident she could extract something useful without triggering a response. Hours passed, and nothing happened. I was starting to think the site didn't care about us poking around, but then Sarah's laptop screen froze. "It's locked me out," she said, her voice calm but tense. Before I could respond, the lights in the office dimmed for a split second. Then Sarah's monitor turned black, replaced by a single line of text, "Participants are watching." We both stared at the screen, unsure of what to do. Sarah reached for her phone, but before she could make a call, her computer shut off completely. "Okay, I'm done," she said, standing up and grabbing her bag. I don't know what that was, but I'm not sticking around to find out. I couldn't blame her. After she left, I sat there for a while, trying to decide if I should follow her lead. But something about that message stuck with me. Participants are watching. It sounded like a warning, but also like a clue. Against my better judgment, I decided to check the site one more time. Using a secure VPN, I accessed the link from an old, offline laptop. The site was still up, unchanged, except for one thing. A new thread on the community tab. The title read, "Final Witness." The post contained a list of names of every remaining member of the task force, including mine. Next to each name was a countdown. Mine had less than 48 hours left. I sat there, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of what this meant. Why a countdown? What was supposed to happen when it hit 0? Then I noticed something I'd overlooked before. At the bottom of the thread, in tiny text, was a hyperlink labeled Terms of Witness. I clicked it, and a new page loaded. It wasn't what I expected. Instead of some cryptic message or disturbing image, it was a contract, a literal, legal-looking document outlining the role of a witness. The terms were vague, but one line stood out: by observing, you are complicit. By remaining, you are bound. Beneath the contract was a single button labeled Accept. I didn't click it. I closed the laptop, unplugged it, and sat in silence, trying to process what I'd just seen. The site wasn't just tracking us, it was binding us to something. But what would happen if I didn't accept? I didn't have an answer, but I had less than 2 days to figure it out. I spent the next 48 hours doing everything I could think of to make sense of what was happening. I combed through old data, reread every name and date on the names of the fallen thread, and tried piecing together any possible connection. But no matter how much I analyzed, nothing added up. By the time the countdown on my name hit its final hours, I felt like I was waiting for something inevitable, though I didn't know what. I wasn't scared, exactly. It was more like being caught in the current of a river. You couldn't fight it, but you could try to understand where it was taking you. With about 2 hours left on the clock, I received an unexpected email. It came from a secure, encrypted address, and the subject line simply read, "This ends tonight." The email contained a single sentence, "Come alone." Coordinates were attached. The coordinates pointed to a location just outside the city, a field about an hour away. There were no instructions, no explanation, just the implication that this was where I was supposed to be when the timer hit 0. I thought about ignoring it, but I knew deep down that wasn't an option. If the Crimson Grove had already infiltrated everything from our work systems to our personal devices, there wasn't much point in running. So, I went. The field was as empty as it looked on Google Maps, just a stretch of open land bordered by a few sparse trees. No buildings, no signs, no indication of why this place mattered. I parked my car on the dirt path and walked toward the coordinates, clutching the flashlight I'd brought as my only source of comfort. When I reached the exact spot, there was nothing there. Just grass and dirt. But as I stood there, a soft humming sound filled the air. It was low and steady, like the faint vibration of a distant generator. I turned in every direction, trying to find the source, but there was nothing. Then my phone buzzed. It was another email, this time with no subject line. The body of the message simply read, "Observe." Before I could process it, the flashlight flickered for a brief moment. The beam illuminated something in the distance, a faint shape, standing still at the edge of the field. I aimed the light toward it, but by the time the beam steadied, the shape was gone. I looked around again, my heart pounding, not out of fear, but because I knew this moment was important. Whatever this was, it wasn't random. The humming grew louder, and the ground beneath me seemed to vibrate slightly. Then, without warning, a bright light erupted from the sky above. It wasn't blinding, but it was intense enough to bathe the entire field in light. And just like that, the countdown hit 0. The light vanished, and everything went silent. The humming stopped. The vibration ceased. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. When I finally checked my phone, I saw that the Crimson Grove site was no longer accessible. The link now redirected to a generic 404 error page, as if the site had been wiped from existence. The next morning, I returned to work, expecting chaos, questions, accusations, maybe even consequences. But to my surprise, the office was eerily normal. Rex was gone, officially transferred to another division, and the task force had been quietly disbanded. No one mentioned the Crimson Grove. It was as if the entire investigation had been erased. But here's the strangest part. I wasn't the only one who noticed the sudden shift. A few of my coworkers, those who hadn't disappeared, also acted like something was off. Though none of us dared to say it outright, we just nodded to each other in silent understanding, like survivors of something we couldn't explain. I've tried to move on, to pretend it was just another weird chapter in an already strange career. But I can't stop thinking about that night in the field, the humming, the light, the single word in the email, "Observe." I don't know what the Crimson Grove was, who was behind it, or why it targeted us. But I do know one thing, it's not over. Every now and then, I'll catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow that shouldn't be there, a flicker on a screen that vanishes when I try to focus on it. And when I check my email, there's always one unread message at the top of my inbox. No sender, no subject, just one word, witness. Alright, so here's this crazy story that's been stuck in my head for months now. I wasn't even sure if I'd ever tell anyone, but the more I think about it, the more I feel like I gotta get it out there. I'm not exactly proud of what happened. If anything, it was one of the dumbest things I've ever done. But hey, hindsight's 20/20. right? Anyway, I figure if you're reading this, maybe it'll save you from making the same stupid mistake I did. I guess I should start by saying I've always been one of those people who's, like, way too curious for my own good. You know the type? Late night Reddit scrolling, falling down YouTube rabbit holes, random deep dives into things I probably have no business looking into. It's not like I'm into anything illegal or super weird. I just like knowing stuff. So, naturally, when I first heard about the dark web, I had to check it out. Before you freak out, I didn't just dive in head first or anything. I did my research. I downloaded the Tor browser, set up a VPN, I'm not a complete idiot, and spent hours reading about what to expect. Most of it was pretty boring, honestly. People like to make the dark web sound like some crazy underworld full of assassins and secret government files, but the reality is, it's mostly scams, weird forums, and sketchy online marketplaces. Still, it fascinated me. I wasn't there to buy anything, I just wanted to see it for myself. That's when I stumbled across the post. It was on a forum, buried deep in a .onion site. The title caught my eye immediately, $2,000 for a simple task, no questions asked. I mean, come on, who wouldn't click on that? The post itself was pretty short. It basically said, if you're good at solving Rubik's Cubes and want to make some easy money, DM for details. There was an email address, too, one of those temporary, encrypted ones. And that was it. Now, here's the thing. I am good at solving Rubik's Cubes. Like, freakishly good. I got into it in high school after watching some guy on YouTube solve one in under 10 seconds, and I guess it just clicked for me. My record's 7.4 seconds, which I know isn't, like, world class or anything, but it's fast enough that people are always impressed when I whip it out at parties. So, when I saw the post, my first thought was, well, that's the easiest $2,000 I'll ever make. I probably should have stopped to think about why someone would pay that much for something so random. But the thing is, $2,000 is a lot of money, especially when you're broke. I'm 24, still living in my tiny studio apartment in Milwaukee. My name is Alex, by the way. And my best friend is Ben. I'm working at a Pizza Hut just to barely scrape by. That money could cover my rent for 2 months, maybe even 3 if I'd budgeted right. So yeah, I emailed the guy. He replied almost immediately. His message was short and to the point, thanks for reaching out. If you're serious about this, I'll send you a cube and some instructions. Complete the task, send proof, and the money's yours. Need your address. I hesitated for a second because, you know, stranger danger and all that. But I figured if things got sketchy, I could always just block him and move on. Plus, it's not like my address was hard to find anyway. I gave it to him, and 2 days later, a package showed up at my door. It was a small cardboard box, about the size of a shoebox, with no return address. Inside was a brand new Rubik's Cube, still in the plastic, and a single sheet of paper. The instructions were typed out in plain, boring Arial font. 1. Solve the cube on camera. 2. Do not edit the footage. 3. Upload the video to the link below. 4. Wait for payment. The link was one of those random .onion URLs. And there was nothing else on the paper. No explanation, no contact info, nothing. It felt a little off, I guess. but at the same time, it didn't seem dangerous. It's a Rubik's Cube. What's the worst that could happen? I set up my phone on a tripod, ripped the plastic off the cube, and hit record. I scrambled it for a bit to make sure it was properly mixed up, then got to work. It only took me about 20 seconds, slower than usual because I was a little nervous, but whatever. I held the finished cube up to the camera, said something like, "Here you go," and ended the video. Uploading it was easy. The link led to a plain black web page with a single upload button. And once I hit submit, a little confirmation message popped up. "Thank you. Payment will be processed shortly." I remember just sitting there for a second, feeling this weird mix of relief and excitement. It was done. I just made $2,000 in less than 30 minutes. Well, almost. I still had to wait for the payment to come through. But I didn't see any reason why it wouldn't. The guy seemed legit, at least as far as people on the dark web go. The money hit my PayPal account the next day. $2,000. Clean. No weird deductions, no hidden fees, just a straight deposit from some random username I didn't recognize. I was ecstatic. I called Ben and told him the whole story, minus the dark web part, because I knew he'd freak out. "Dude, that's insane," he said. "You seriously got paid for solving a Rubik's Cube?" "Yep," I replied, grinning like an idiot. "Easiest money I've ever made." At the time, I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. At first, everything seemed fine. The $2,000 stayed in my PayPal account, and I even used some of it to treat myself to a decent dinner. Like an actual sit-down meal, not just the usual Pizza Hut or McDonald's drive-thru. Life went on as normal for the next few days. Work was the same, lots of late-night pizza deliveries to college kids who never tipped. And I was even thinking about splurging on something big, like a new gaming chair or maybe even upgrading my PC. But then weird things started happening. It was little stuff at first, stuff I probably wouldn't have even noticed if I weren't already a bit on edge from the whole dark web experience. Like, one day I logged into my email and saw that my inbox was filled with spam. Not just regular spam, like sketchy ads or phishing emails, but really bizarre, nonsensical stuff. Messages with subject lines like, "Your solution has been received" or "Upload confirmed," with random strings of numbers and letters in the body. I figured it was some kind of glitch, or maybe even a coincidence. After all, I'd used a burner email to contact a Rubik's Cube guy, so it's not like my personal info should have been compromised. Still, I decided to change a few of my passwords, just to be safe. I didn't think much of it after that. Then, 2 days later, Ben called me in the middle of the night. "Hey," he said, his voice sounding way too serious for 2 a.m. "You're not in trouble or anything, right?" I sat up in bed, confused. "What? No." "Why would you ask that?" "Because I just got a notification about you on Reddit. Some random subreddit I've never even heard of. It was tagged with your name, like your actual name. Now, before you ask, no, I don't use my real name on Reddit. I'm not an idiot. My username is some stupid handle I came up with in high school, and it's completely unconnected to my real identity." So, hearing that my name, my actual, full name, was showing up on some random forum, that was unsettling, to say the least. What did it say? I asked. I don't know, man. I didn't click on it. The whole thing seemed sketchy, and I didn't want to mess with it. I just wanted to let you know. I thanked him and hung up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I mean, how could my name be on Reddit if I'd never used it there? I tried to go back to sleep, but my brain wouldn't let it go. After tossing and turning for what felt like forever, I finally grabbed my laptop and decided to check it out myself. It didn't take long to find the post. Ben was right. It was buried in some obscure subreddit I'd never even heard of, something like r/obscure mysteries or r/weird events. The title was vague, "Have you seen this person?" And sure enough, when I clicked on it, there was my name, spelled out perfectly in big, bold letters. Underneath the post, someone had uploaded a screenshot of the Rubik's Cube video I'd recorded. Not the whole video, just a single frame where I was holding up the solved cube and looking straight into the camera. I froze. This wasn't some anonymous forum post. This was me. My face, my name, all out there for random strangers to see. And worse, the post didn't include any context. No explanation, no comments from the original poster, nothing. It was just there, like an open invitation for people to start digging into my life. I did what any sane person would do. I deleted my entire Reddit account. Every comment, every upvote, everything. I figured if someone was trying to mess with me, I wasn't going to make it any easier for them. For a while, I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The next day, I got an email from my landlord. "Hey Alex, just a heads up, someone called the office this morning asking for information about you." I didn't give them anything, but I thought you should know. I stared at the email for a long time, trying to process what he was saying. Who would call my landlord? And why? My rent was paid, and I didn't have any issues with the building, so there was no reason for anyone to be digging into my personal life. I replied, thanking him for the heads up, but deep down, I was starting to freak out. I hadn't done anything wrong, at least, nothing illegal. Sure, I'd used the dark web, but that was just out of curiosity. It's not like solving a Rubik's Cube was a crime, right? But then I started thinking about the guy who'd posted the job. I didn't know anything about him. No name, no contact info, nothing. And while the task itself seemed harmless, I realized I'd never actually considered what he wanted the video for. Why would someone pay $2,000 for a solved Rubik's Cube video? What could he possibly do with it? That question kept me up all night. The following morning, I decided to dig a little deeper. I fired up the Tor browser again, not because I wanted to get involved in anything shady, but because I wanted answers. I thought maybe if I could find that original forum post, I could track down the guy who hired me and figure out what his deal was. But when I tried to visit the site, it was gone. I don't mean the post was deleted, I mean the entire site had disappeared. The URL just led to a blank page, like it had never existed in the first place. That's when it hit me. Whoever this guy was, he wasn't some random hobbyist with too much money. He'd planned this. All of it. The post, the payment, the Rubik's Cube, everything. And now, I was somehow caught up in whatever he was doing. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe the site went down for maintenance, or maybe I just typed in the URL wrong. But deep down, I knew something was off. This wasn't just a simple job. I didn't realize how bad it was until the police showed up at my door. When the knock came, it wasn't dramatic. No loud banging or frantic shouts, just a firm, steady knock, knock, knock. I was in the middle of reheating some leftover pizza hut, half paying attention to a Twitch stream on my phone, when I heard it. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I figured it was probably a delivery driver at the wrong door or maybe one of my neighbors needing to borrow something again. I opened the door, and there they were. 2 police officers standing on my doorstep. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is the part where I panic, right? But honestly, my first thought was that they were canvassing the neighborhood for some routine thing. A missing person, maybe, or some local crime they were investigating. I mean, what could they possibly want with me? "Hi, can I help you?" I asked, doing my best to sound casual. The officer in front, a guy who looked like he'd seen it all, gave me a polite but serious nod. "Are you Alex Miller?" Okay, that threw me off a bit. I mean, sure, I wasn't hiding my identity or anything, but it's still jarring when someone you've never met uses your full name. I nodded slowly. "That's me," I said. "What's this about?" "We just need to ask you a few questions," the second officer said. She was younger, probably mid-30s, and her tone was calm but firm. "Can we come in?" Now, here's the thing. I'm not one of those people who knows all the rules about what to do when the police show up. But I've seen enough true crime documentaries to know that letting them into your apartment is usually not a great idea, even if you've done nothing wrong. So I hesitated, glancing back at the messy state of my living room. "Ah, what kind of questions?" I asked, stalling. "It's about a video," the older officer said. "We have reason to believe you might have been involved in an incident that we're investigating." That's when it hit me. The video. The Rubik's Cube. I tried to play it cool, but my stomach was doing flips. "A video?" I said. "I'm not sure I know what you mean." The younger officer reached into her pocket and pulled out a phone. She tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward me. There it was. The exact same frame from my Rubik's Cube video that had been posted on Reddit. My face, frozen mid-smile, holding up the solved cube. "We just need to clarify a few details," she said. At this point, my brain was racing. I couldn't figure out what was happening. The video wasn't illegal. It was literally just me solving a puzzle. So why were the police here? I stepped aside and let them in, mostly because I didn't want my neighbors overhearing the conversation. The last thing I needed was Karen from 3B spreading rumors about me running some underground Rubik's Cube racket. They sat down on my couch while I stood awkwardly near the kitchen, fidgeting with the hem of my hoodie. "So," I started, "what's this all about?" "I mean, I know the video you're talking about, but I'm not sure why it's relevant." The older officer leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "The video was uploaded to a server that we've been monitoring as part of an ongoing investigation. It was flagged because it matched certain criteria we've been tracking." "What kind of criteria?" I asked, feeling a cold knot forming in my chest. "I'm afraid we can't disclose that," the younger officer said. "But we do need to know who asked you to make the video." This was the moment I'd been dreading. I couldn't exactly lie. I'd left a digital paper trail, and if they really wanted to, they could probably trace my burner email and figure out where I'd found the job. So I decided to come clean. Look, I said, I know this is going to sound weird, but it was just a random job I found online. Someone was offering $2,000 to solve a Rubik's Cube on camera, so I did it. That's all. I don't know the guy's name or anything about him. He paid me through PayPal, and I haven't heard from him since. The officers exchanged a glance. Not a dramatic one, just a quick, subtle look, like they'd heard this kind of story before. You said he paid you? The older officer asked. Yeah, $2,000. It's still in my PayPal account if you need proof. And you never asked what the video was for? No, I said, starting to feel defensive. It was just a puzzle. I figured maybe he was some kind of collector, or had a YouTube channel or something. I didn't think it was a big deal. The younger officer nodded, jotting something down in a small notebook. Do you still have the packaging the cube came in? I froze. The box. It was still sitting in my closet, buried under a pile of old jackets. I hadn't thought about it since the day it arrived. Yeah, I think so, I said. Why? What's going on? The older officer stood up, his expression unreadable. If you don't mind, we'd like to take it with us. It might help us with the investigation. Okay, I said, feeling completely out of my depth. But can you at least tell me what this is about? Am I in trouble? You're not under arrest, the younger officer said. We just need to figure out how you're connected to this. Connected to what? They weren't giving me any answers, and the more they talked, the more it felt like I'd been dragged into something way bigger than a simple Rubik's Cube video. I retrieved the box from my closet and handed it over. They thanked me, gave me their contact info, and left without explaining anything else. I stood there for a long time after they were gone, staring at the empty spot on my couch where they'd been sitting. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over. And I had a sinking feeling that I was only starting to understand how deep I was in. I barely slept that night. I wasn't scared, exactly, more like uneasy. It's hard to explain. The police hadn't outright accused me of anything, and they didn't seem overly hostile, but there was this underlying tension to the whole thing that I couldn't shake. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, trying to figure out what I'd missed. What was so special about my Rubik's Cube video that it caught the attention of the police? And why did they want the box? It was just cardboard. I tossed the instructions and packing slip weeks ago, so it wasn't like it contained anything incriminating. At least, I didn't think it did. The next morning, I tried to go about my day like normal. I went to work, dropped off a few pizzas, and scrolled through Twitter during my breaks. But no matter how hard I tried to focus, my mind kept drifting back to the video. I decided to check my PayPal account again, just to make sure the $2,000 was still there. It was. But that's when I noticed something odd. The payment came with a note attached. I hadn't bothered to read it before, honestly. I didn't even realize you could attach notes to PayPal transactions. But now, it stood out like a neon sign. Thank you for your contribution. What contribution? I clicked on the sender's username, hoping it would give me some clue about who this guy was. But the profile was completely empty. No profile picture, no bio, not even a transaction history. It was like the account had been created just for this one payment. I wanted to let it go, but I couldn't. Something didn't sit right with me. Later that night, I decided to do a little more digging. I opened up Tor again, this time with my VPN set to some random European country, just in case, and tried searching for anything related to Rubik's Cube video, dark web contributions, or even weird PayPal payments. Most of the results were useless, but after an hour of scrolling, I stumbled across a discussion thread on a dark web forum. The title, Puzzles as Keys. I clicked on it. The thread was short, only a handful of comments, but the gist of it was unsettling. Apparently, there was a trend on certain dark websites where people were using puzzles, actual, physical puzzles like Rubik's Cubes, jigsaw puzzles, and lockboxes, as part of some kind of cryptographic system. The idea was that each puzzle contained a hidden code, and solving it unlocked access to something. Files, money, or maybe even more sensitive things. I leaned back in my chair, trying to wrap my head around it. Could that be what this was about? Had my Rubik's Cube been some kind of key for something? Something I didn't understand? The thought made my skin crawl. I clicked on one of the comments for more details, but as soon as the page loaded, my screen froze. Then the browser crashed entirely. When I tried to reopen it, the site I'd been on was gone. Just like the forum where I'd found the original job post. At that point, I was done messing around with Tor. I shut off my laptop and spent the rest of the night glued to Netflix, trying to distract myself. But the next morning, things got worse. It started with an email. Not to my burner account this time, it went straight to my personal Gmail. The subject line was blank, and the message itself contained only 2 words, "Stop searching." No name, no sender info, nothing. Just those 2 words. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. Someone knew what I was doing. Someone had connected my burner account to my real identity. And now they were trying to scare me into backing off. I deleted the email immediately and tried to convince myself it was a prank. Maybe it was Ben messing with me. He'd always had a twisted sense of humor. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Ben didn't even know about the Rubik's Cube, let alone my involvement with the dark web. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, jumping every time my phone buzzed or I heard a knock at the door. But nothing happened. No more emails, no more cops, just silence. I thought about calling the officers who'd come to my apartment, but what would I even tell them? That I'd gone back on the dark web after they'd left, and now I was spooked because someone sent me a vague email? It sounded ridiculous. So I kept it to myself. That night, I got another call from Ben. "Hey, have you seen the news?" he asked, his voice buzzing with urgency. "No, why?" "There's some crazy stuff going down. Apparently, some hacker group's been leaking private data from government servers. It's all over Twitter. People are saying they're using encrypted videos to spread the files." I froze. "What do you mean, encrypted videos?" "Like, normal-looking videos that actually contain hidden data. They use algorithms or some crap to hide the files so they're impossible to trace." "Why?" "Are you asking?" "No reason," I lied. "But I knew." The Rubik's Cube video wasn't just some weird job. It was part of something bigger, something I didn't understand. And whether I'd meant to or not, I'd played a role in it. I hung up with Ben and sat there in the dark, replaying everything in my head. The job post, the payment, the Reddit thread, the police visit. It all started to make a sick kind of sense. My video wasn't just a video. It was a piece of a puzzle. And somewhere out there, someone was using it to unlock something they weren't supposed to. I should have felt guilty, but mostly I just felt helpless. What was I supposed to do now? The days after Ben's call were a blur. Every time I tried to focus on something, work, watching TV, even just scrolling through Instagram, I'd catch myself zoning out, replaying every detail of the past couple of weeks. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, that the $2,000 I thought was easy money was about to cost me more than I'd ever imagined. And then, it did. It started when I came home from work one afternoon to find a letter taped to my apartment door. It wasn't from my landlord or a delivery service. It was just a plain white envelope with my name written on the front in shaky handwriting. I brought it inside, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly in thirds. The message was typed, with no signature or logo, just plain text on a blank page. You have been identified as a person of interest in an active federal investigation. We strongly recommend that you contact legal counsel immediately. Further inquiries will be made at your residence. I read it 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Was this some kind of prank? A scam? But it didn't feel like a joke. The phrasing was cold and formal, and the fact that it was delivered directly to my door, no email, no phone call, no official visit, made it feel deliberate. I flipped the paper over, searching for anything else, but it was blank. Just that one message, vague and threatening, like it had been designed to make me spiral. And it worked. I spent the next few hours glued to my laptop, trying to figure out what was going on. I scoured news articles, Reddit threads, anything I could find about the federal investigation Ben had mentioned. The hacker group was still in the headlines, but none of the reports mentioned Rubik's Cubes, encrypted videos, or anything even remotely related to me. I thought about calling the police officers who had taken the box from my apartment, but I hesitated. What if I was already on their radar? What if calling them made me look guilty, even though I had no idea what was going on? By the time I went to bed, I'd worked myself into a full-blown panic. I didn't know who to trust, what to do, or how to prove I wasn't involved in whatever this was. The next morning, my nightmare officially became real. I was halfway through my morning shift at Pizza Hut when 2 plainclothes agents walked into the store. They didn't make a scene or anything, they just asked my manager if they could speak to me in private. I could feel every pair of eyes in the kitchen on me as I followed them outside, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. They didn't cuff me or haul me away, which I guess was a small mercy. Instead, they asked me to come down to their office for questioning. They didn't say what it was about, but I didn't need them to. I already knew. The questioning lasted hours. They asked me about the Rubik's Cube video, the payment, and the guy who'd hired me. They asked how I'd found the job, whether I'd contacted anyone else, and if I'd made any other videos like it. I answered everything as honestly as I could, but I could tell they didn't believe me. At one point, one of the agents slid a photo across the table. It was a grainy screenshot of my Rubik's Cube video, just like the one that had been posted on Reddit. Only this time, there was something else in the frame. Something I hadn't noticed before. On the edge of the cube, barely visible, was a tiny sticker. I didn't even remember seeing it when I had solved the puzzle, but there it was, plain as day. The sticker had a QR code on it. "What is this?" the agent asked. "I don't know," I said truthfully. He raised an eyebrow. "You didn't think it was strange that the cube had a QR code on it?" "I didn't even notice it," I said, my voice shaking. "I thought it was just a normal cube." "I swear." The agents exchanged a look. They didn't tell me what the QR code led to, but I could tell it wasn't good. One of them mentioned something about sensitive data leaks, and another said something about international ramifications. I had no idea what they were talking about, but I knew I was in deep. By the time they let me go, I felt like I'd aged 10 years. They didn't arrest me, apparently. They didn't have enough evidence to charge me with anything, but they made it clear that I wasn't off the hook. "You're free to go, for now," one of them said as I stood to leave. "But we'll be in touch." I nodded numbly and left the office, my mind racing. That was a month ago. Since then, I haven't heard from the agents, but I can't stop looking over my shoulder. Every time I check my email, I'm half expecting to see another cryptic message. Every time my phone buzzes, I think it's going to be them, telling me to come back in. I still don't know exactly what I got caught up in, but I've pieced together enough to know it's bad. From what I've read online, the QR code on the Rubik's Cube was probably part of some larger scheme, maybe a way to smuggle encrypted data across borders or something. My video was just one piece of the puzzle, and I was the idiot who handed it over without asking questions. The $2,000 is still sitting in my PayPal account. I haven't touched it. I thought about refunding it, but the account it came from is gone, just like the forum where I found the job. For all I know, transferring it back could make things worse. Every now and then, I think about contacting a lawyer or going to the press, but honestly, I don't even know what I'd say. "Hi, I accidentally helped a criminal organization because I thought I was getting paid to solve a Rubik's Cube." Yeah, that's a great headline. So, for now, I'm laying low. I deleted all my social media, stopped using Tor, and even switched to a new phone, just in case. I know it's probably overkill, but after everything that's happened, I'm not taking any chances. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that nothing is ever as simple as it seems. If a job feels too easy, if the money feels too good to be true, it probably is. And if some stranger on the internet offers you $2,000 to solve a Rubik's Cube, run. Just to clarify, I haven't been contacted by the agents again, and I'm trying to move on with my life. I'll keep you updated if anything changes. When I signed up for the army, I knew I wasn't going to be living the high life. I wasn't delusional about the whole serving your country thing either. Don't get me wrong, I'm proud to serve, but I didn't have any fantasies about being the hero in some feel-good war flick. For me, it was a practical decision: the pay, the benefits, and honestly, the ticket out of my dead-end hometown. I didn't have much of a plan after high school, and my recruiter, a smooth-talking sergeant named Miller, made the whole deal sound pretty solid. After basic, which was about as fun as a root canal, I got stationed at a pretty standard base for a couple of years. It wasn't bad. I guess. The routine was predictable, and most of the time, the work was just boring. Occasionally, something interesting would happen, but nothing that would make you do a double take. That all changed when I got my orders for a deployment to some remote monitoring outpost. They called it Raven's Perch. Didn't tell me much, just some vague BS about it being a critical operation. The base was somewhere in Alaska. Not a major city like Anchorage or Fairbanks. This was deep in the wilderness, off the map. The kind of place you'd never know existed unless you were specifically looking for it. When I checked the map, there wasn't even a damn road leading to it. Supplies were flown in by helicopter, and people didn't leave unless they were getting reassigned or retiring. I figured it was some kind of early warning system, keeping an eye on Russian military activity or whatever. Made sense, I guess. Alaska's close enough to Russia that it seemed plausible. I flew into Anchorage first. The connecting flight to the tiny airstrip near Raven's Perch was delayed because of bad weather, so I had a few hours to kill at the airport. I scrolled through Reddit, browsed Instagram, and grabbed a coffee at Starbucks. Everything felt normal, like any other day. I even texted my mom to let her know I was on my way to my new assignment. She sent back the usual, "Be safe, love you." The flight to the airstrip was in a cramped, noisy plane that felt like it was going to rattle apart at any second. The other passengers were mostly military, but nobody was in the mood to chat. We were all bundled up in our cold weather gear, and the drone of the engines drowned out any chance of conversation. When we finally landed, I expected someone to be waiting to brief me or at least give me a ride to the base. Instead, there was just one guy in a parka leaning against a military-grade truck, scrolling on his phone. His name was Corporal Jones, and he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "You the new guy?" he asked without looking up. "Yeah, private first class, Ben Williams," I said. "Cool," he said, shoving his phone into his pocket. "Hop in." The ride to the base took about an hour, but it felt way longer. The landscape was barren and eerie, with nothing but snow, ice, and the occasional scraggly tree. Jones didn't talk much, but when he did, it wasn't exactly comforting. "You'll see pretty quick, this place is different," he said, keeping his eyes on the road. "Different how?" I asked. He just shrugged. "You'll see." The base itself was nothing special from the outside. It looked like a cluster of concrete buildings surrounded by fences and guard towers. The whole place had a kind of utilitarian vibe, like it was designed to be as functional as possible and nothing more. When we pulled up, I noticed something strange. There weren't many people around. A few soldiers were walking between buildings, but it was quieter than any base I'd ever been on. Jones dropped me off at the barracks and told me to report to the commanding officer once I'd settled in. Inside, the barracks were basic but clean. There were about a dozen bunks, but only 4 of them were occupied. A guy sitting on one of the bunks looked up when I walked in. "New guy?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, dropping my bag on an empty bunk. He nodded. "Name's Alex." "You'll like it here, or not?" "Depends." "Depends on what?" I asked. "On how much you like being told not to ask questions," he said with a smirk. I wasn't sure if he was joking or not, but before I could ask anything else, another guy walked in and said it was time for chow. The mess hall was just as quiet as the rest of the base. There were maybe 20 people there in total, and most of them were keeping to themselves. The food was standard military fare, edible, but barely. As I sat down with my tray, I noticed a group of guys in the corner whispering to each other. Every once in a while, one of them would glance over their shoulder, like they were worried about being overheard. Alex sat down across from me and saw where I was looking. "They're on the night shift," he said. "That's why they're all paranoid." "What do they do?" I asked. He shrugged. "Something classified." "I don't know." Nobody really talks about it. I didn't press the issue. It was normal for bases to have classified operations, and I figured this one was no different. Still, there was something about the way Alex said it that made me think he wasn't being entirely honest. After dinner, I was told to report to the CO. His office was in a small building near the center of the base. Inside, it was warm and well lit, but the walls were bare except for a few generic motivational posters. The CO, Captain Miller, was a middle-aged guy with a no-nonsense attitude. "Private Williams," he said, gesturing for me to sit down. "Welcome to Raven's Perch. This is a high-priority assignment, so I expect you to follow orders without question. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," I responded. "Good. Your primary duties will involve routine maintenance and monitoring. You'll receive a full briefing tomorrow. For now, get some rest." I saluted and left, but something about the way he said "without question" stuck with me. It wasn't unusual for officers to emphasize discipline, but this felt different. Back at the barracks, I tried to settle in. The guys were friendly enough, but no one really talked about what they did here. It was all small talk, sports, music, stuff like that. After lights out, I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the feeling that something about this place didn't add up. The next day, I was assigned to a routine patrol around the perimeter of the base. It was uneventful, just like every other patrol I had ever done, until I noticed a building I hadn't seen before. It was smaller than the others, almost like a bunker, with no windows and a single, reinforced door. There were no signs or markings, but what stood out the most were the 2 cameras mounted above the door, slowly scanning back and forth. When I got back, I asked Alex about it. "Oh, that's the lab," he said, like it was no big deal. "Don't bother asking what goes on in there. Nobody knows." "You're telling me no one's curious?" I asked. Alex laughed. "Of course we're curious. But like I said, this place is different. People who ask too many questions usually don't stick around long." I didn't know what he meant by that, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that bunker and what might be inside it. It wasn't just the cameras or the secrecy. It was the fact that no one seemed to know anything about it. On most bases, rumors would be flying around like crazy, but here, it was like everyone had collectively decided not to talk about it. I decided to do some digging. I had a laptop with me, and after making sure the Wi-Fi was secure, I logged onto the Tor browser. It wasn't my first time on the dark web. I'd used it before out of curiosity, mostly to browse weird forums and look at conspiracy theories. This time, I started searching for anything related to Raven's Perch or the lab. Most of what I found was junk, wild stories about secret experiments and shadowy government projects. But one thread on a forum caught my attention. It didn't mention Raven's Perch specifically, but it talked about remote facilities in Alaska where non-traditional research was being conducted. The posts were vague, but there was enough detail to make me think they weren't just random conspiracy theories. One post, in particular, stood out. It was a link to a video hosted on some sketchy site. The caption said, "This is what happens when they lose control." I hesitated for a moment before clicking. The video started with what looked like security camera footage of a lab. There were people in white coats working at various stations, but their faces were blurred out. Suddenly, the feed cut to another camera, this one showing an empty hallway. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lights started flickering, and a shadow appeared at the end of the hallway. Before I could make out what it was, the video ended. I closed my laptop and sat there in the dark, wondering what the hell I'd just seen. I didn't sleep much after watching that video. It wasn't just the footage itself that bothered me. It was the way it felt connected to everything I'd seen so far, the empty base, the bunker, the unspoken rule about not asking questions. I knew I couldn't bring it up with anyone, though. Alex's words kept bouncing around in my head. People who ask too many questions usually don't stick around long. The next day, I went through my usual routine: breakfast, patrol, maintenance work. It was as mundane as it gets, but the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was bubbling just beneath the surface. Every person I passed seemed distracted. Conversations were short, and no one was in the mood for idle chatter. Around noon, I saw something strange near the lab, that windowless bunker I'd noticed the day before. A small group of soldiers in hazmat suits was unloading equipment from a truck. I couldn't tell what they were carrying. Everything was packed into gray, unmarked cases. But the thing that stood out to me the most was their demeanor. They didn't talk to each other, not even casually. It was like they were performing a choreographed routine, every movement precise and deliberate. I didn't want to stand there gawking, so I kept walking. But later, during lunch, I brought it up casually to one of the other guys in the barracks, a quiet dude named Riley who worked as a mechanic. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone light, "what's the deal with the lab? I saw some guys unloading stuff earlier, but they looked, I don't know, serious." Riley didn't even look up from his tray. "Don't worry about it," he said flatly. "Yeah, but I'm serious." He interrupted, finally meeting my eyes. "Don't worry about it." The way he said it sent a clear message: drop it. That night, I couldn't help myself. I went back on the dark web, searching for more information. I dug through forum posts, obscure blogs, and shady websites that made my antivirus software freak out. Most of it was the same stuff I'd seen before, half-baked conspiracy theories and vague rumors. But eventually, I stumbled onto a forum I hadn't seen before. It was called Project Chimera Archives. The site looked like it hadn't been updated in years. The design was basic, just black text on a white background. It had a handful of threads, most of them locked or archived. One thread caught my eye: Remote Research Facilities, Alaska. The thread was a mess of speculation and cryptic comments, but one post stood out. It was from a user named Gatekeeper77, and it read, "They're not just experimenting on technology out there. They're experimenting on something older, something they don't understand." If you're stationed there, don't get involved. Just keep your head down and do your time. And whatever you do, don't trust the systems. What the hell did "don't trust the systems" mean? I saved a screenshot of the post and closed the browser. My laptop was starting to heat up anyway, and I didn't want to push my luck. The next morning, I was assigned to a new duty, assisting with equipment checks in the comms building. It was a small, stuffy room packed with monitors, servers, and enough tables to trip you up if you weren't careful. The guy in charge was Sergeant Baker, a gruff but approachable guy in his early 40s. "All right, Williams," he said, handing me a clipboard. "We're doing a routine systems check. Power grid, network connections, emergency backups. Easy stuff. Just follow my lead." For the first hour, everything seemed normal. Baker showed me how to run diagnostics on the equipment, and I made notes on the clipboard like a good soldier. But then we got to one of the older systems, a standalone terminal in the corner of the room. "This one's a little different," Baker said, hesitating for a moment before powering it on. The terminal booted up with a low hum, and a black screen with green text appeared. It looked like something out of the 80s. No logos, no interface, just a blinking cursor. "Is this thing even connected to the network?" I asked. Baker shook his head. "Nope. It's isolated. Always has been." "Then what's it for?" I asked. "Don't ask," he said, his tone sharper than I'd expected. I didn't push it. Baker typed in a long string of commands, and the screen filled with what looked like diagnostic data. At least, that's what I assumed it was. Half of it didn't make any sense to me, random strings of numbers, strange symbols, and words in languages I couldn't recognize. "Everything looks good," Baker muttered, closing out of the program. "Let's move on." But as he turned to leave, I noticed something on the screen, something that wasn't there before. In the corner, barely visible, was a line of text. "Do you see it?" I froze. "Williams, you coming?" Baker called from the doorway. "Yeah, sorry," I said, quickly following him out. I didn't mention the text. I figured it was some kind of glitch or maybe a prank someone had programmed into the system. But as the day went on, I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I pulled up the screenshot of the post from Gatekeeper 77. The words "don't trust the systems" jumped out at me again. What did they mean? Before I could think too much about it, there was a knock at the door. Alex stuck his head in, looking annoyed. "Hey, we're heading to the mess hall. You coming, or are you just going to sit there all night?" "Yeah, I'll be there in a sec," I said, closing my laptop. The mess hall was livelier than usual, probably because it was pizza night. I sat with Alex and a couple of other guys, trying to act normal, but the whole time, my mind was elsewhere. I kept replaying the events of the day, piecing everything together in my head, the lab, the strange systems, the cryptic messages online. It was all connected, I just didn't know how. As I headed back to the barracks, I noticed something strange. The lights around the base were flickering, not all at once, just in random patterns. No one else seemed to notice, so I didn't say anything. But as I passed the lab, I heard a low humming sound, almost like a generator. I didn't stop, I didn't look, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing too close to something I wasn't supposed to understand. The next morning started like any other, but there was a noticeable tension hanging over the base. It wasn't anything overt, no alarms or emergency meetings, but you could feel it in the way people moved. Conversations were shorter than usual, and most people avoided eye contact. Even Alex, who usually had a sarcastic comment for everything, seemed quieter. I tried to act normal, going through my assigned tasks without drawing attention to myself. For most of the day, I was helping clean and inspect equipment in one of the storage hangars. It was tedious work, but it gave me time to think. What stuck with me the most was that line from the terminal, "Do you see it?" I couldn't figure out if it was a message, a coincidence, or some kind of glitch. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt like it wasn't random. It felt deliberate, like someone or something wanted me to notice it. After dinner, I decided to do some more digging online. I waited until the barracks were quiet, then pulled out my laptop and opened the Tor browser. This time, I wasn't just searching for vague information. I wanted something concrete. I started with Project Chimera archives, combing through old threads for anything useful. Most of it was the same as before, rumors about secret experiments, cryptic warnings, and links to broken or offline sites. But one comment caught my eye. It was from a user named Watcher99, and it read, "The truth isn't in the files, it's in the signals. You have to decode the patterns." Signals. Patterns. I had no idea what they were talking about, but it reminded me of something I'd seen earlier that day. During my patrol, I passed one of the base's communication towers and noticed something odd. There was a faint beeping sound coming from the equipment, too faint for most people to notice, but distinct if you were paying attention. At the time, I'd written it off as normal background noise. Now, I wasn't so sure. I decided to investigate. The comms tower wasn't far from the barracks, and it wasn't exactly off limits. As long as I didn't look like I was snooping, no one would question why I was there. I grabbed a flashlight and headed out, keeping my pace casual. When I got to the tower, it was eerily quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the equipment, barely audible over the wind. I walked around the base of the tower, pretending to inspect the wiring. That's when I noticed something strange. There was a small access panel on the side of the tower, partially open. Inside was a mess of wires and circuits, but what stood out was a device I didn't recognize. It looked like a small black box with a single green LED, blinking steadily. It wasn't labeled, and it didn't look like standard military equipment. I reached out to touch it, but before I could, I heard footsteps behind me. "Williams, what are you doing out here?" I turned to see Sergeant Baker standing a few feet away, his face unreadable. Just doing a quick inspection," I said, trying to sound casual. Baker raised an eyebrow. "Inspection? That's not your assignment." I shrugged. I thought I heard something weird earlier. Figured I'd check it out. Baker stared at me for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but don't mess with the equipment. You're not cleared for that." "Got it," I said, stepping away from the panel. Baker waited until I started walking back to the barracks before heading toward the tower himself. I glanced over my shoulder and saw him closing the access panel and securing it with a padlock. Back in the barracks, I couldn't stop thinking about that black box. What was it, and why was Baker so quick to lock it up? I knew I couldn't ask anyone about it, Not directly anyway. But I had a feeling it was connected to the signals Watcher 99 had mentioned. Later that night, I searched online for anything related to signal patterns or decoding frequencies. Most of what I found was technical jargon I didn't understand, stuff about radio frequencies, spectrograms, and signal modulation. But eventually, I stumbled onto a thread on a ham radio forum. The user claimed to have intercepted strange transmissions from remote areas, describing them as structured but nonsensical. One comment stood out: they're testing something that shouldn't be tested. The signals are just a byproduct. The post didn't specify who they were or what was being tested, but it matched the pattern of everything else I'd found: cryptic warnings, vague clues, and just enough detail to keep me hooked. The next day, I decided to keep a low profile. I didn't want to attract any more attention after my encounter with Sergeant Baker, so I stuck to my assigned tasks and avoided the comms tower altogether. But that evening, something happened that made it impossible to ignore what was going on. It was just after dinner when the lights started flickering again. At first, I thought it was just another power fluctuation. Those weren't uncommon here. But then I noticed something strange. The flicker wasn't random. It was rhythmic, almost like it was following a pattern. I watched the lights for a minute, trying to make sense of it. Then I realized the rhythm was identical to the blinking LED on the black box I'd seen. That couldn't be a coincidence. I wanted to tell someone, but who? Alex would probably just tell me to drop it. Baker clearly wasn't going to give me any answers. And Captain Miller? I didn't trust him, not one bit. Instead, I decided to document everything. I wrote down the pattern of the lights, sketched out what I remembered of the black box, and made notes about everything I'd seen so far. I didn't know what I was dealing with, but I knew it wasn't normal. That night, I had trouble falling asleep, not because I was scared, but because I couldn't stop my brain from going in circles. Every clue I'd found seemed connected, but I couldn't figure out how it all fit together: the laboratory, the signals, the black box, the flickering lights. And then there was that message: "Do you see it?" I didn't have an answer yet, but I was starting to think that whatever was happening here, it was bigger than I'd imagined. By this point, I knew I was out of my depth. Whatever was going on at Raven's Perch, it wasn't just about monitoring or routine military operations. There was a bigger picture here, and the more I tried to piece it together, the more questions I had. The morning after the lights flickered in that rhythmic pattern, I went through my routine like normal: maintenance, patrols, equipment checks. It was all the same mind-numbing tasks I'd been doing since I arrived. But now, I was hyper-aware of everything around me, every piece of equipment, every glance from my fellow soldiers, even the faint hum of the generators. It all felt significant in a way I couldn't fully explain. I hadn't mentioned the pattern in the lights to anyone, but it was all I could think about. When I was assigned to another equipment check in the comms building, I figured it was the perfect opportunity to dig a little deeper. Sergeant Baker wasn't there this time. It was just me and another private named Johnson. He was young, probably fresh out of training, and he didn't seem all that interested in what we were doing. "Hey, Johnson," I said as casually as I could, "you ever notice anything weird around here?" He looked up from the server he was pretending to inspect. "Weird how?" "I don't know," I said. "Like, stuff that doesn't make sense. Strange equipment, signals, that kind of thing." He shrugged. "Not really. but I heard some of the night shift guys talking about how the lab's been busier than usual. Something about extra shipments coming in late at night. Extra shipments? I asked. Yeah. I don't know what's in them, though. Probably classified. That was the first concrete lead I'd gotten in days. If the lab was busier than usual, it meant something was happening, and I needed to find out what. When I finished my shift, I decided to head back to the comms tower. I didn't have a plan, but I figured I could at least take another look at the black box I'd seen. Maybe it had something to do with the signals Watcher 99 had mentioned. The tower was deserted when I got there. The padlock Baker had put on the access panel was still in place, but it wasn't as secure as he probably thought. With a bit of effort, I managed to pop it open and look inside. The black box was still there, its green LED blinking steadily. I took out my phone and recorded a short video of the device, making sure to capture the blinking pattern. Then I closed the panel and walked away, trying to look as inconspicuous as possible. Back in the barracks, I uploaded the video to my laptop and compared the blinking pattern to the notes I'd made about the lights. They were identical. That couldn't be a coincidence. I spent the rest of the night researching signal patterns and decoding methods. Most of what I found was way over my head, stuff about radio frequencies, spectrograms, and signal modulation. But eventually, I stumbled onto a tool that let you input patterns and analyze them for hidden messages. I hesitated for a moment, then uploaded the video I'd taken of the black box. The tool processed it for a few minutes before spitting out a result. Transmission received. Status unstable. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Transmission unstable? What was the black box transmitting, and to where? I was so focused on the results that I didn't hear Alex come in. "What are you working on?" he asked, leaning over my shoulder. I quickly closed my laptop. "Nothing, just messing around online." Alex raised an eyebrow but didn't press the issue. "Well, don't stay up too late. You're on patrol tomorrow." "Got it," I said, forcing a smile. As soon as Alex left, I reopened the laptop and went back to the analysis. I tried inputting the pattern into a few other tools, but none of them gave me anything useful. Eventually, I gave up and went to bed, my mind racing with possibilities. The next day, during my patrol, I noticed something strange near the lab. A group of soldiers was unloading another shipment from a truck, but this time, they weren't in hazmat suits. They were wearing regular uniforms, and they looked tense. One of the crates they were carrying slipped out of someone's hands and hit the ground with a dull thud. The soldier who dropped it froze, his face pale. He glanced nervously at the others, and for a moment, no one moved. Then one of them barked something I couldn't hear, and they quickly picked up the crate and carried it into the lab. I didn't stick around to watch. Something about the way they reacted told me that whatever was in those crates, it wasn't supposed to be handled carelessly. That night, I went back on the dark web and posted a question on Project Canary archives. I didn't give too many details, just enough to see if anyone else had noticed the same things I had. Within an hour, I got a reply from Gatekeeper 77, "They're pushing it too far. The instability is spreading. Get out while you still can." I stared at the message, trying to process what it meant. Instability spreading? What was spreading? Before I could reply, The thread was deleted. I leaned back in my chair, my head spinning. Whoever Gatekeeper 77 was, they clearly knew more than they were letting on. But if they were right, then things at Raven's Perch were worse than I thought. I didn't know what the lab was experimenting on, but I had a feeling it wasn't just technology. The tension on the base was becoming impossible to ignore. It wasn't just me noticing it anymore. Everyone seemed to be walking on eggshells. Orders were coming down faster than usual, and the people stationed here looked more stressed with each passing day. Even Alex, who normally shrugged off everything, had started keeping his voice down when he talked, like he was worried someone might overhear. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever they were working on in the lab was starting to spiral out of control. The cryptic warnings from Gatekeeper 77 and Watcher 99 kept running through my head. Instability is spreading. Don't trust the systems. None of it made sense, but I knew one thing for sure. I was running out of time to figure it out. That night, something happened that changed everything. I was sitting in the barracks, trying to make sense of the blinking patterns I'd recorded from the black box. I'd gone through every decoding tool I could find, but none of them were giving me clear answers. I was just about to give up when the power on the base flickered again. At first, I thought it was just another random fluctuation, like before. But then I noticed something strange. My laptop, which wasn't connected to the base's power grid, started behaving erratically. The screen flashed, and for a moment, I thought it was about to crash. Then a window opened on its own. It was a plain, black screen with a single line of text. "Williams, you're too close." I froze. I hadn't entered my name anywhere, not on the forums, not in the software I'd been using, nowhere. There was no way anyone could know it was me. Before I could react, another line appeared. The lab isn't just studying. It's creating. Creating what? I was about to type a response when the screen went black. My laptop rebooted itself, and everything I'd been working on was gone. The next morning, I decided I couldn't sit on the sidelines anymore. I needed answers. I didn't care if it got me into trouble. I had to know what was going on in that lab. I waited until after dinner, when most of the base had settled into its nightly routine. Then I made my way toward the lab, keeping to the shadows. The building was quiet, but the low hum I'd heard before was still there, louder now that the rest of the base had gone quiet. The front door was guarded, but there was another entrance around the back, a smaller door I'd seen the soldiers using to unload crates. I wasn't sure if it would be locked, but when I tried the handle, it turned. I stepped inside, careful to close the door behind me. The interior of the lab was nothing like I'd expected. It wasn't sterile and futuristic, like you'd see in movies. Instead, it was cramped and cluttered, with wires and equipment crammed into every available space. The air smelled faintly of ozone, like after a thunderstorm. As I moved through the narrow corridors, I heard voices up ahead. I stopped and listened. "We need more time," one of them said. "The instability is worse than we thought." "We don't have more time," another voice replied. "If we don't shut it down, it's going to spread beyond containment." There was a pause, then the first voice spoke again, lower this time, like they didn't want to be overheard. "You know we can't do that. The higher-ups won't allow it. They want results." I stayed where I was until the voices faded, then I crept forward, careful not to make any noise. The corridor ended at a set of double doors with a sign above them that read, restricted access. Authorized personnel only. I didn't have a key card, but the doors were slightly ajar. I pushed them open just enough to slip inside. The room beyond was massive, far larger than I'd expected. Banks of monitors lined the walls, displaying streams of data that meant nothing to me. In the center of the room was a large, glass enclosure filled with machinery I didn't recognize. Inside the enclosure, something was moving. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as I moved closer, I realized it was real. The thing inside the glass was shifting, almost like it was alive, but not in a way I could understand. It didn't have a shape, not exactly. It was like a shadow, constantly changing, constantly twisting. I heard footsteps behind me and ducked behind a console just as two people entered the room. "We can't keep this up," one of them said. "The containment field is failing. If this thing breaches—" "It won't breach," the other replied, though they didn't sound convinced. "We just need to stabilize it. The algorithms are adjusting." "Adjusting isn't enough. You saw what happened at the other site. Do you really think—" "Keep your voice down." They moved closer to the glass enclosure, their voices dropping to a whisper. I couldn't hear what they were saying anymore, but I didn't need to. I'd seen enough. I left the lab the same way I came in, making sure no one saw me. Back in the barracks, I tried to process what I'd just seen. The lab wasn't just conducting experiments, it was containing something that wasn't natural. I didn't know where it came from or what it was, but I knew one thing for sure: they didn't have it under control. The next few days were a blur. The base was on edge, with everyone working overtime to stabilize the systems, though no one would tell me what that meant. I stayed out of the way, keeping my head down and doing my assigned tasks. Eventually, I got orders to transfer back to my previous station. No explanation, just a simple reassignment. I didn't argue. As I packed my things, Alex stopped by my bunk. "Guess you're getting out of here, huh?" he said. "Yeah," I replied. "Looks like it." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Listen, whatever you think you know about this place, just forget it. Trust me." I didn't say anything. On my last night at Raven's Perch, I stayed up late, staring at my laptop. I thought about going back on the dark web, posting everything I'd seen, but in the end, I decided against it. Whatever was happening out there, it wasn't something I could stop. The next morning, I boarded a plane back to Anchorage. No one said goodbye. As I stared out the window, watching the base disappear into the distance, one thought kept running through my mind: some things are better left alone. Alright, so let me set the stage here. I'm not your typical Silicon Valley hotshot. I'm just a regular dude named Alex who happens to be decent at coding. I learned everything on my own, no fancy college degree or anything. But hey, if you can write clean code and meet deadlines, most folks don't give a damn about a diploma. I've been freelancing for a few years, scraping by doing mostly boring stuff: data scraping, building chatbots for small businesses, automating mind-numbing tasks. Nothing to brag about, but it paid the rent. A few months back, I was in that classic freelancer slump. You know the one: too many small, low-paying gigs, not enough sleep, and a constant feeling of being behind. Every client thinks their project is top priority, of course. My inbox was overflowing, my fridge was empty, and my brain was fried. I was basically a walking zombie fueled by caffeine and instant ramen. That's probably why I ignored all the warning signs when that email came in. It landed in my inbox at 2:38 a.m., which should have been my first clue that something was off. The subject line just said, "Freelance opportunity, $10,000, fast turnaround needed." 10 grand? For one job? That's like winning the lottery in my world. But at 2:38 a.m., with 2 empty ramen cups in my trash and rent overdue, my judgment was, shall we say, impaired. The email itself was short and to the point. We are looking for someone with experience in Python and data analysis to develop a program for us. Details will follow if you accept. Pay is $10,000 upon completion. Reply if interested. No name, no company, no real project description. Just a Gmail address that looked like it was created 5 minutes ago. Seriously, who uses a Gmail address for a 10K job? Every instinct I had screamed scam. But my bank account whispered sweet nothings about finally paying off my credit card debt. So, like an idiot, I replied within 10 minutes. Another email came through, this time with a few more details, but still nothing concrete. They wanted a bot that could scan Reddit posts in real time, flag specific patterns, and organize the flag posts into a private database. They were vague about what patterns they were looking for, saying they'd give me the parameters once the bot was live. They even linked me to a GitHub repo with some sample code to, speed things up. Here's the thing, the job itself didn't sound that weird. Scraping Reddit for data? People do that all the time. The pay was insane, sure, but the task itself seemed legit. My gut was screaming at me to run, but my bank account was doing the Macarena. I wrote back, asking for clarification on the payment. The reply came instantly. They offered half up front via Bitcoin and the rest upon delivery. They sent a QR code for a wallet address and said I'd have the first half within an hour of confirming. Bitcoin? Now, I'm not a complete idiot. I know Bitcoin is that crypto stuff you hear about in news stories about hackers and dark web marketplaces. I'd never touched it before. I hesitated. This was feeling more and more like a bad idea. But then I checked the wallet address on a Bitcoin Explorer. It was legit, and the balance, let's just say whoever these people were, they were loaded. Against my better judgment, I confirmed. An hour later, my newly created Bitcoin wallet lit up. $5,000, just like they promised. I stared at the screen, half expecting it to vanish, but it didn't. The money was real. I was officially in too deep. The next email had a link to i.onion address. If you don't know, .onion addresses are for accessing the dark web, the shady underbelly of the internet that's not indexed by Google. I'd used the Tor browser a couple of times before, mostly out of curiosity, but never for anything serious. They said all further communication would happen through a messaging platform on this dark website. This should have been it. This should have been the moment I said, nope, I'm out. When your client tells you to use the dark web, it's not to share cute puppy videos. But I was already hooked. I tasted the money, and my brain was conveniently ignoring all the alarm bells. I downloaded the Tor browser, fired it up, and pasted the link. The site was bare bones, like something out of the early 2000s. No logos, no fancy design, just a lock-in box and a chat window. I logged in, and my contact was already waiting for me, under the username Cypher. Cypher gave me the final specs for the bot. It needed to monitor Reddit 24/7, scan for specific keywords and phrases, which they provide later, of course, flag posts with anomalies, and send the data to an encrypted server they'd set up. It had to be completely invisible, no public API calls, no activity logs, nothing that would tip off Reddit mods or users. It was a tall order, but doable. It would require some creative coding, but nothing I couldn't handle. The weirdest part was the list of subreddits they wanted me to target. It wasn't the usual suspects like r/news or r/world news. They gave me this bizarre mix of niche communities, r/urban exploration, r/unresolved mysteries, and a few others I'd never even heard of. At this point, I was more curious than anything. Why these specific subreddits? What patterns were they looking for? When I asked, Cypher just said, focus on building the bot. You'll understand soon enough. Creepy, right? But $5,000 was already in my account, and the other 5 was all I could think about. I told myself I didn't need to know their motives. I just needed to deliver. So I got to work. And that's where things started to get really weird. Honestly, the coding part wasn't that bad. They'd already done some of the groundwork with that GitHub repo they sent. It took me about a week of solid work to piece everything together, debug it, and run a few test scans. The bot, which I affectionately named Snooper, was surprisingly solid. I even felt a little proud of my creation, which in hindsight is pretty messed up. The final step was connecting Snooper to their server. They gave me another .onion address for that. This one opened up a page with nothing but an upload field. I zipped up the bot's code, uploaded it, and waited. About an hour later, a message popped up from Cypher, bot is live. Final payment sent. I checked my Bitcoin wallet, and there it was. The remaining $5,000. $10,000, just like they promised. Easiest money I'd ever made. Or so I thought. I tried to go back to my normal life, or what passed for normal for a sleep-deprived freelancer. I paid my rent, stocked my fridge with something other than instant ramen, and even treated myself to a new gaming mouse. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just done something I shouldn't have. It was about 3 days after I delivered the bot that I started seeing the Reddit posts. And that's when the reality of what I'd built started to sink in. At first, I didn't think much of it. I wasn't a hardcore Redditor or anything, mostly just used it for coding help or when I was procrastinating. But then I started seeing screenshots of these bizarre posts circulating on Twitter and Discord. They'd pop up on random subreddits, never the same one twice, and disappear almost as quickly as they appeared. These screenshots were the only reason anyone even knew they existed. The posts themselves weren't offensive or violent. They were just weird. Each one followed the same format, a block of cryptic text, a set of coordinates, and a list of names. The text was always strange, almost poetic, but it didn't make any sense. Stuff like, where shadows meet the edge of time, silence echoes. North 48.86, East 2.35. Witnessed by Emily, Thomas, Olivia. Sometimes the coordinates pointed to real places, parks, abandoned buildings, even just random street corners. Other times, they led to the middle of nowhere. And then there were the names. These weren't usernames or handles. They were full, real names. The posts would stay live on Reddit for less than a minute before vanishing. If you clicked on them, you'd just get the usual "this post has been removed" message. It wasn't clear if the mods were taking them down or if the person who posted them was deleting them. At first, I thought it was some elaborate ARG and alternate reality game. Reddit's full of that kind of stuff. But as more screenshots surfaced, people started noticing something unsettling. Some of the names listed in the posts were real people. A few amateur sleuths on Reddit started digging. They found that some of the names matched recent missing persons reports. Others belonged to people who'd been in the news for strange reasons, unsolved crimes, bizarre accidents, or mysterious deaths. One of the names even belonged to a college student who'd gone missing the same day their name appeared in a post. That's when I started to panic. The day after I saw the first screenshot, I got a new message from Cypher on the dark web chat: "Do not discuss the project. Do not investigate the results. Your contract is complete." That was it. No thanks for the work, no follow-up, nothing. Just a message that felt more like a threat than anything else. I tried to brush it off. I'd done my job, gotten paid, and that was that. But it was hard to ignore how closely these posts mirrored what my bot was designed to do: real-time scanning, pattern recognition, and data logging. It was exactly what they'd asked for. Against my better judgment, I started digging into the posts myself. I fired up the Tor browser and went back to those subreddits Cypher had told me to target. Most of the posts were gone, of course. But every now and then, someone would post a screenshot or mention a new one that had popped up. The timestamps were all over the place, sometimes hours apart, sometimes just minutes. But they always seemed to happen in waves. That's when I realized something else. Those subreddits they'd had me monitor weren't random at all. They all had one thing in common: a strong connection to real-life events. r/unresolved mysteries, r/urban exploration, r/paranormal. These were places where people discussed things that happened in the real world. Missing persons, abandoned locations, strange occurrences. I couldn't shake the feeling that these posts weren't just meaningless spam. They felt like breadcrumbs, like someone or something was trying to lead people somewhere. I decided to test a theory. I took one of the sets of coordinates from a screenshot and plugged it into Google Maps. It pointed to an abandoned hospital in upstate New York. I searched for the hospital's name and found dozens of urban exploration videos on YouTube, people filming creepy hallways and graffiti-covered rooms. But there was nothing specific about the coordinates themselves. Still, I couldn't let it go. I found another set of coordinates from a different post. This one led to a hiking trail in Northern California. Again, nothing immediately jumped out. It wasn't like I was finding evidence of crimes or anything. Just places. I almost convinced myself that it was all just a coincidence, a dumb prank someone was pulling for attention. But then something happened that I couldn't explain away. It was a Friday night. I was scrolling through Reddit, half watching some streamer play Valorant on my second monitor, when a new post appeared on r/unresolved mysteries. The title was just a set of numbers, coordinates. The post itself had the same cryptic tone as the others. When the lines converge, only silence remains. 40.712 degrees north, 74.0060 degrees west. Witnessed by Sarah, Lisa, Alex. I froze. Those coordinates were for New York City, specifically Times Square. I stared at the post for a few seconds before it vanished, just like all the others. I refreshed the page, but it was gone. No comments, no trace of it in the subreddit's history. What freaked me out wasn't just the location. It was the names. The first two didn't mean anything to me. But the third one was mine. Seeing my own name in that post hit me like a punch to the gut. My heart was pounding in my chest. Alex. My name. Listed right there, along with those cryptic phrases and coordinates. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a coincidence, a common name. Maybe someone was trolling me, playing some sick joke. But deep down, I knew the odds of that were astronomical. I hadn't told anyone about the job, and the only person who knew about the bot was Cypher. I sat there, staring at the blank screen where the post had been, trying to make sense of it all. The post was gone, just like all the others. But it was burned into my memory. My name. Those coordinates. That same eerie format. For the first time since this whole thing started, I genuinely regretted taking that job. 10 grand suddenly didn't feel worth it. Not if it came with this kind of gut-wrenching paranoia. I closed my laptop and tried to distract myself. I paced around my apartment, watched some mindless TV, anything to get my mind off of it. But the harder I tried, the worse it got. Every creak of the floorboards, every passing siren, every shadow in the corner of my eye felt amplified, menacing. It felt like the walls were closing in. The next morning, I decided I needed answers. I knew it was probably a stupid idea, maybe even dangerous, but I couldn't just ignore what was happening. I decided to go back to that GitHub repo they'd sent me. I'd cloned it when I started the project, but I'd only focused on the code I needed for the bot. I never really looked at the other files. This time, I opened everything. Most of the files were what I expected, snippets of sample code, notes about API calls, that sort of thing. But buried in one of the subfolders, I found a text file named parameters.txt. I hadn't noticed it before, and when I opened it, I instantly understood why they hadn't shared it with me directly. The file contained a list of keywords the bot was programmed to flag. It was a weird mix of phrases like missing, disappeared, and coordinates, along with other, more esoteric terms I didn't recognize. There were also dozens of subreddit names, way more than what they'd initially told me. But the creepiest part was a section labeled behavioral tracking. Apparently, Snooper wasn't just scanning Reddit posts. It was also flagging users who interacted with those posts, people who commented, upvoted, or even just clicked on them. The program tracked their activity across the entire site and stored everything in that encrypted database. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a chill crawl down my spine. What kind of patterns were they looking for? And why were they tracking the people who interacted with these posts? The more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I felt. This was way bigger than just flagging weird Reddit posts. But I still wasn't ready to give up. I needed to see what was in that database. I still had the link to the .onion server where the bot was uploading its data. It felt like crossing a line, but I figured I had a right to know what was going on, considering I built the damn thing. When I logged into the server, I expected a wall of encrypted gibberish. But the data was surprisingly organized. There were folders for each day the bot had been running, and inside each folder were hundreds of text files, one for every flagged post. I opened a random file, and sure enough, it matched the format of the screenshots I'd seen: coordinates, names, cryptic phrases. But there was more metadata about the posts, lists of user interactions, even timestamps for when the posts were removed. Then I found a file from the same day the post with my name appeared. The text matched exactly what I'd seen, down to the coordinates and the list of names. But there was an extra section at the bottom, something I hadn't seen before: initiated contact, Sarah, Lisa, Alex. Status, pending update. My stomach dropped. Initiated contact? What the hell did that mean? And why was my name listed under pending update? It felt like I was in a bad spy movie, and I was definitely not the hero. I kept scrolling through the files, looking for anything that could shed some light on what was happening. That's when I found something that made my blood run cold: a file named targets.csv. The file was massive, a spreadsheet with thousands of rows of data. Each row had a name, a set of coordinates, and a status column. The statuses were things like pending, observed, and removed. I searched for my name, and there it was, listed under pending. I stared at the screen, numb with disbelief. This wasn't just some weird data collection project. It was a hit list. Or something even more sinister. And I was on it. I disconnected from the .onion server and shut everything down. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt genuinely terrified. I was in way over my head. I had no idea who Cypher was, what they wanted, or what they were planning to do with this data. But I knew one thing for sure: I was a target now. I thought about going to the police, but what could I even tell them? Hey, I built a bot for some shadowy figure on the dark web, and now my name's showing up on a list of potential targets? They'd probably laugh me out of the station, or worse, think I was involved in something illegal myself. Instead, I backed up everything I'd found: screenshots, files, the GitHub repo, onto an external hard drive. Then I wiped my computer clean. If something happened to me, I wanted there to be a record, even if it didn't make sense to anyone else. Over the next few days, I kept a low profile. I didn't go on Reddit, I didn't log into the .onion server, and I definitely didn't respond to any messages from Cypher, not that they sent any. I tried to go back to my normal routine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow, every stranger on the street, every unexpected noise sent my heart racing. Then, one night, I got an email. It was from a different address this time, one I didn't recognize. The subject line just said, "You're being tracked." The email itself was blank, except for one thing: a single set of coordinates. My coordinates. My apartment. When I saw that email, my blood turned to ice. My first thought was that it had to be a prank, some sick joke from someone who'd figured out what I'd done. Maybe even a phishing attempt. But when I read the coordinates again and checked them on Google Maps, it confirmed what I already knew in my gut. The numbers pointed directly to my apartment building. I stared at the email, my mind racing. Who sent this? How did they know where I lived? And why were they telling me I was being tracked? Was it a threat? A warning? I had no idea. Half expecting another message to pop up, explaining everything, but nothing came. Just the blank email and those chilling coordinates. I checked the sender's email address, hoping for some kind of clue. It was another throwaway Gmail account, just like the one Cypher had used. I hovered over the reply button, debating whether or not to write back. But what was I supposed to say? Hi, who are you, and why do you know my address? Yeah, that felt like a great way to escalate the situation. Instead, I powered down my laptop, locked all the doors, and tried to push the thought out of my head. Easier said than done. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind rattling the windows, every distant siren, it all felt amplified, like it was trying to tell me something I didn't want to hear. The next morning, I decided to do something I probably should have done from the start. I went back to that .onion server, the one where Snooper's data was stored. I needed to see if there were any new files, anything that might explain what was going on. When I logged in, everything looked the same at first. Same folders, same structure. But as I clicked through the files, I realized something was off. Some of the newer files had timestamps from just hours earlier, even though I hadn't touched the bot since delivering it. It was still running. Still scanning Reddit. Still flagging posts. I opened the most recent file, and my chest tightened. The file was short, just a single line of text, observation complete. Proceed with next phase. No coordinates, no names, nothing else. Just that. Observation complete. What did that even mean? And next phase? That sounded ominous as hell. It felt like I'd just crossed some invisible finish line, some deadline I didn't even know existed. That's when I noticed something else. A new folder had appeared on the server, one I hadn't seen before. It was titled Pending 1. The same word that had been next to my name in the targets file. I clicked on it, and my stomach churned. Inside were photos. Photos of me. They weren't professional surveillance photos or anything. Most of them looked like they'd been taken from a distance, through windows or across the street. There was one of me leaving my apartment, another of me sitting in a coffee shop with my laptop, and another of me walking through the parking lot of a grocery store. The timestamps on the photos were recent, within the past 2 weeks. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Someone had been following me, watching me, and I hadn't even noticed. I was so caught up in the digital world, in the bot and the data, that I completely missed what was happening in the real world, right outside my window. There was a text file in the folder, too. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Pending target, Alexer identified. Monitoring complete. Action required. That was it. No context, no explanation. Just another cryptic message that felt more like a command than anything else. I slammed my laptop shut and pushed it away, as if physical distance could somehow undo what I'd seen. I needed to get help, real help. This was way bigger than some coding project gone wrong. I grabbed my phone and started Googling private investigators in my area. I figured I needed someone who knew what they were doing, someone who could make sense of all this, someone who wouldn't think I was crazy. But before I could make the call, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Don't involve anyone else. You're being watched. My hands were shaking as I stared at the message. I hadn't told anyone about this. Not a soul. And yet, somehow, whoever was behind all this already knew what I was planning to do. For the first time, I felt completely and utterly helpless. I was trapped in a game I didn't understand, with rules I didn't know, and players who were always one step ahead. I deleted the draft of the email I was about to send to the PI, powered down my phone, and just sat there in the silence, trying to figure out my next move. Running seemed like the only option, but where would I go? And how could I be sure they wouldn't find me? That night, I made a decision. I couldn't stay in my apartment, not knowing who might be watching me. I packed a small bag with essentials, just enough for a few days, and booked a last-minute motel room in a different part of town. As I drove to the motel, I tried to think rationally. Maybe this was all just a scare tactic. Maybe Cypher, or whoever was behind this, just wanted me to freak out so I wouldn't dig any deeper. I kept telling myself that, over and over, but it didn't help. Before I went to bed, I did one last search online. I looked up the coordinates from the very first Reddit post Cypher had used as an example, the one that started this whole mess. They pointed to a warehouse in an industrial park, not far from the city. I didn't know why, but something about that location stuck in my mind. It felt important, like it was tied to everything that was happening. I told myself I wouldn't go there. It was too risky. I didn't want to make things worse. But deep down, I already knew. I was going to that warehouse. The drive to the warehouse the next morning felt like an eternity. The warehouse was in one of those desolate industrial parks that always feel forgotten by time, the kind of place where weeds grow through cracks in the pavement and the only sound is the wind whistling through broken windows. Rows of corrugated metal buildings sat in silence, baking under the morning sun. The coordinates pointed to a particular building near the end of the lot, a large, gray, windowless structure with no signs or markings. It looked utterly nondescript, like it could be storing anything from old furniture to hazardous waste. I parked a block away and walked the rest of the distance, my heart pounding a steady rhythm against my ribs. What was I even expecting to find? Answers? Confrontation? I told myself I was just there to take a look, that I'd turn around the second anything seemed off. But deep down, I knew I was in too deep to back out now. I had to see this through, even if it was the last thing I did. As I approached the warehouse, I noticed a faint hum, like the sound of a generator running somewhere inside. The place didn't look completely abandoned. The massive metal roll-up door was shut tight, but there was a smaller side door with a keypad lock. I wasn't about to try my luck with that, so I circled the building, keeping my distance and trying to stay out of sight. On the far side, I saw something that made me stop. A small security camera was mounted above a service entrance, its lens slowly panning back and forth. Whoever was running this place wasn't trying to advertise their presence, but they weren't exactly hiding it either. I crouched low and kept moving, skirting the edge of the building until I found a window. It was high up, and the glass was grimy with dirt and dust, but I figured it was worth a shot. I stood on a broken cinder block to get a better view. What I saw inside didn't make any sense. The main floor was filled with rows upon rows of computer servers, their lights blinking rhythmically in the dim light. It looked like a data center, but a makeshift one. Cables snaked across the floor in tangled heaps, and random pieces of equipment were stacked haphazardly on metal racks. There were a few desks scattered around, each with multiple monitors. And on one of those screens, I saw something that made my stomach clench. It was the interface for the bot I built. Snooper. It was running, live, right there in front of me. On another monitor, I saw Reddit posts scrolling by, the same ones I'd seen screenshots of online. The bot was flagging them, just like I designed it to do. The screen next to it was displaying a map, a global heat map with hundreds of glowing dots scattered across its surface. Some of the dots were blinking, while others remained a steady, ominous red. As I squinted to get a better look, movement caught my eye. Two people walked into view, both wearing plain clothes and carrying tablets. They didn't look like tech workers. They looked more like security guards, or maybe even military. They moved with a quiet efficiency, checking the screens, tapping on their tablets, and then disappearing deeper into the warehouse. I was so focused on watching them that I didn't hear the footsteps behind me until it was too late. Looking for something? I spun around, nearly losing my balance on the cinder block. A man stood a few feet away, wearing a nondescript black jacket and a blank expression. He wasn't much older than me, maybe in his early 30s, but there was something in his stance, in the way he held himself, that made him seem incredibly intimidating. I think I'm lost, I stammered, trying to play it cool, but my voice cracked, betraying my fear. He didn't say anything, just stared at me for a long, unnerving moment. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket. I braced myself, thinking he was going to pull out a weapon, a gun, a knife, something. But instead, he took out a phone and tapped the screen a few times. My own phone buzzed in my pocket. I froze. There was no way he could have known my number. No way. Slowly, I pulled out my phone and looked at the screen. It was a text from the same unknown number that had been sending me messages. "You've seen enough. Go home." I looked up at him, but his expression hadn't changed. He wasn't asking me to leave. He was telling me. I thought about arguing, asking questions, demanding answers. But one look into his cold, empty eyes told me that would be a mistake. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a dismissal. Without another word, I turned and walked away, feeling his gaze burning into my back the entire time. I didn't stop walking until I reached my car. I got in, started the engine, and drove. I didn't care where I was going, as long as it was away from that warehouse, away from that man, away from all this. When I finally got back to my apartment later that night, there was an envelope taped to my door. No name, no address, nothing. Just plain white paper. I took it inside and opened it cautiously, half expecting it to be another threat, another warning. Instead, there was a single sheet of paper inside, with 3 words typed on it: "Contract officially terminated." That was it. No threats, no explanations, no further contact. Just those 3 words. Over the next few weeks, I kept waiting for something else to happen. For more emails, another message from Cypher, another visit from the man at the warehouse, maybe even the police showing up at my door. But nothing came. It was like the entire thing had just stopped. I deleted everything related to the job from my computer. I stopped using Reddit altogether, at least for a while. I even considered moving to a different city, changing my name, disappearing completely. But what would that have accomplished? Whoever these people were, they obviously had resources and reached far beyond anything I could comprehend. The only thing I knew for sure was that they'd let me go. For now. It's been months, and I've tried to move on with my life. I took a few normal, boring freelance gigs. I even started seeing a therapist, though I haven't told her the whole story. How could I? She'd think I was crazy. But every now and then, I still find myself thinking about the bot, about Snooper. Is it still running? What were they really looking for? And what was that next phase they mentioned? I don't think I'll ever get answers to those questions. Maybe I don't want them. All I know is that I'll never take another job from an anonymous email address again. 10 grand isn't worth your peace of mind. It's not worth your safety. And it's definitely not worth ending up a name on some list, a dot on some map, a target for someone, or something you don't even understand. The internet is a scary place, and you never know what's real and what's fake, and who's behind the screen controlling everything. Be careful out there. You never know who's watching.